Hello, 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 folks. How are we doing this weekend? I hope everyone is having a good day today. Welcome, Alex. How are you doing? I hope everyone is having an excellent weekend so far. I think I am. Got to see some family members yesterday and a good friend of mine, so that was fun. We'll get started here in about a minute 30. Alex says simulation nearly confirmed. Was just chatting with someone last night recommending to pick up TypeScript. So Alex, was that somebody who already excuse me. Is that somebody who already works as a dev and they were recommending for you to pick up TypeScript? Aha, yeah. Yeah, and that's what I've been seeing on a lot of, job descriptions and things is, one of the recommended skills is TypeScript. So that is what we will be covering today. In about a minute, we'll get started. Hey, Dumpster Dev, how's it going? Hey, Parasocial. Hey, Hassler. Hey, Fox the Ghost. Welcome to the stream. Alrighty, the timer has clicked down, so let's go ahead and jump on in. Hey, third decade, good to see ya. Hey, Icefire, welcome to the stream. Alrighty, let's flip it on over to the camera. And yeah, so in case you missed the announcement, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about TypeScript. We're going to be exploring, a little bit of why TypeScript is useful, what it is, what it can do for you. And this is not going to be a comprehensive tutorial by any means. There's a lot that goes into TypeScript. But what we're going to do is kind of dip our foot into it a little bit today and practice various common things that you might use TypeScript for, and then that'll give you the space to explore on your own. Read documentation. I'll show you where that is. Practice examples on your own, that sort of thing. Because I think once we start messing with it a little bit, you'll see that it's actually not going to be too hard for you to pick up and run with. So at least that's the intent of today's stream. Oh, hey, no worries, Angram. Yeah, I know this isn't the best time for everyone. There's different, we got folks watching from all over the world, which I think is the best part of streaming on Twitch. So, fortunately, if I am not in your time zone, that's perfectly fine. You can always watch the VOD later on. Don't mess up your sleep schedule for me. Um, you can check out the VOD later on. It's on my Twitch channel, and then before it expires, it will be moved to my YouTube channel. So if you don't yet have a link to my YouTube channel, you can do !YouTube in chat, and that will give you a direct link to my YouTube channel where you can watch all of my past content ad free. So keep that in mind too. If Twitch ads get you down, if it makes it hard to finish the VODs, if you try to watch the VODs and you just get worn down by all the ads, feel free to head over to my YouTube channel instead and watch them ad free there. Hey, Champo. Hey, Emlu. There we go. Dan can code said, someone said TypeScript. I'm here. Arwen says Mind Wolf at 2x speed. Yeah, a lot of folks do that with streamers, especially educational videos, because, yeah, they can be pretty long. And if you want to watch them at faster speed and you still absorb the information that way, that's great. So much knowledge so fast. Yeah. So, talking about TypeScript today. First off, you might think, okay, fine. I already know JavaScript. I can build apps with JavaScript. you might, at this point, you might feel like, I got a pretty good handle on this stuff. I can build an app and it works and it's full stack and I can deploy it and all that stuff. Why do I need to learn another language? Or what are some reasons why I might want to learn this whole other thing and build exactly the same type of stuff I was building before? So what's the point? I like to use real world examples for things. I don't like talking about theory or concepts. I like to I like to go from real world examples. So that's what we're going to start off with today. I am going to declare some variables and build a function, and we're going to test some values in that function, and we're going to see what happens. So, all right, so here we go. I'm going to declare some variables first. We're going to declare grade. We're going to declare another one called grade2. These are extremely creative variable names, I know. And then we're going to declare another one called let test total. And then we're going to set some values on those variables. So like grade is going to be set to a string value of 85. Grade 2 is going to be set to 85, a number, and then test total is going to be set to a value of 100 as a number. Okay, all well and good there, no problems. Now we're going to set up a function. And what this function is going to do is a very simple calculation of, it's just going to take the grade and it's going to divide it by the test total. So basically what we're doing is we're trying to see how well somebody might have done on a test, right? So if they got a score of, 60 out of 100, that's not so good. But then if they got a score of, 60 out of 65, then that's much better. So we're, simple function, simple calculation. We're just going to set that up, and then we're going to pass some values into it and see what happens. All right. Icefire says, excuse me. Icefire said, never heard of TypeScript. Aha, you are in for a treat then, my friend. And Parasocial says, you could say that using TypeScript is more like using ESLint, not learning a separate language. Yes, we will get there, I promise. All right. So our function here, we're going to call it calc percentage. Calc percentage. And into that, we are going to pass, we're going to have two parameters here. We'll just call them student grade, and then test total. We'll call it that. And then this is going to be arrow function syntax. So if you're not familiar with arrow functions, it's just all we're doing is we're writing a function just in a slightly more modern way. All right. And so our percentage here is just going to be, percentage is just going to be our student grade divided by the test total. So nothing crazy here so far. And then what we're going to do is we're going to return this student got, got percentage percent on the test. Okay. And then what I want to do is call that function and console log the result. So we'll console log calc percentage, and we're going to pass in, obviously. Well, I shouldn't say obviously. What are we going to pass in? Well, let's say I'm going quickly. I know I need to call this function. I want to pass in a score, and I want to pass in the test total. So I'm going quickly. So I'm just going to say, all right, I'm just going to pass in grade. That's 85. So that, JavaScript will take that. It's fine. Or, maybe I just forget the 2. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in grade and then test total. All right. So I can save that. And I'm going to go ahead and execute it with Node here. Node example JS. All right, perfect. The student got 85% on the test. It works just fine. Oop, thank you for the follow, Knobsip. All right, so that worked as expected. I passed in grade. It is a string, but JavaScript is pretty loosey-goosey when it comes to, how it interprets stuff you pass in. If it can recognize it as a number, it's going to kind of hold your hand, and it'll work the same for other numbers too. If they got like a 3, and then we change this to a 95. Save it, execute it again, The student didn't do so well, but it still works. However, what happens if, this is a string, right? So anything can be passed in here. So what happens if I pass in A? That's a grade, right? It's a string. It's valid. What am I going to get if I execute this now? Oh, you're right. I passed. Oh, no, it's fine. Yeah. There's a question about what did I pass in here? So remember that parameters are different from arguments. Parameters are different from arguments. So when I define a function, I can call these parameters whatever I want. They don't have to match my variables. What I pass in here, these are arguments. And so these match my variables. So I'm passing the variables into the function, then they're translated, into these parameter names, and that's what gets calculated here. So this was done properly. Yeah. So what happens when I pass in an A into this? It executes just fine, right? But what I get back is hot garbage. This student got NAN percent on the test. It still executes, right? JavaScript didn't throw any errors, nothing. But what I get back is functionally useless, right? But JavaScript being JavaScript and being very nice and accommodating and not really caring what anything looks like is just like, yeah, that's fine. Cool, ship it. All right. So this is an example of where JavaScript's indifference toward the types of things that we're passing in and trying to do, let's say, mathematical operations on, can really come back to bite us in the butt, right? Dang, JavaScript, get it together. A divided by 95. Exactly, yeah. And so, this is where JavaScript can, in its attempt to be helpful, can really bite us on the butt, because it would have been nice if we'd have known about this sooner, right? If we'd had some indication that instead of passing this variable, this variable might work 90% of the time, right? It could mostly be numeric. It could mostly be 32, 51, 90, that sort of thing, 590, who knows? These could mostly be numbers, which JavaScript will handle just fine. But then maybe, two times out of 100, it could be letter grades instead. You've got somebody at a desk somewhere manually entering values, and maybe they did this one wrong. Maybe they enter an A or B or C. And then occasionally you're going to get weird intermittent results that just don't make any sense. And so wouldn't it have been nice if we'd had some kind of indication sooner that the variable we were using, this one here, was maybe not a good choice for performing a mathematical operation? If only it could have told us somehow that this numeric variable, which is going to be, truly numeric and numeric in all cases, was probably the better one to use. We should have been using grade 2 all along. Dang it, JavaScript, get it together indeed. Yeah, absolutely. And so this is where TypeScript can come in, because TypeScript is going to help us figure these sorts of things out while we write our code. Yeah, type safety. Exactly. It shall tell us. It shall tell us indeed. Actually, if you are careful about the way you write it, you might find that those errors are not so cryptic after all. But we'll see that as we go. So I'm going to hydrate real quick here. Yeah. So what TypeScript helps us do is it helps us enforce types on JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is kind of an odd duck of a programming language, like as we've talked about so far. It doesn't care how we declare variables. We can set up a variable as a string at one point, change it to a number, change it back to a string, and JavaScript is just going to roll with it. But what TypeScript does then is allows us to add guardrails onto JavaScript. And it allows us, it doesn't, necessarily force us, but it allows us to declare types at various points within our code, and then alerts us if at any point we violate those types. Yeah. So what is TypeScript? Let's see it. So again, TypeScript is JavaScript with syntax for types. TypeScript is a strongly typed programming language that builds on JavaScript, giving you better tooling at any scale. So yeah, essentially it's just JavaScript, but at strategic points, when such as declaring variables or setting up function parameters, you specify what type of information you're entering, whether that's a string or a number or a Boolean or a custom type that you define yourself. And we're going to do a little bit of that a little bit later on. But then the cool thing is that you write it with all these strict specified types, but it compiles or transpiles itself into JavaScript at runtime, and you can execute it just like JavaScript, except you have the peace of mind of knowing that your variable types are going to line up. You're not going to have any spelling errors because it checks for that too, right? If something doesn't exist, if you misuse a parameter, if you misspell something, it will tell you before you try to run it and then spend half an hour, or an hour combing through your code looking for a single time when you left the S off the end of a variable or something like that. And yeah, so I mean, those are the main advantages of TypeScript. And what you'll find is that TypeScript is also very good for working on teams. So, working with large teams of developers, maybe you're working on code at different times, maybe you're working on code in a lot of different modules or whatever. You're exporting a bunch of stuff, you're importing a bunch of stuff, and you might not even be very familiar with what's in somebody else's module. You're just importing it so you can use it. And so if TypeScript is in place, it's going to make sure that you never accidentally transpose a numeric variable with a string variable, or that if you're passing in an object, that you have all the required fields for that object. And we're going to see several examples of this as we go through some scenarios today. So to think about that as far as working with a team, another example of this too would be, let's say, somebody wrote this function 2 weeks ago or something like that. And now I'm going through and I'm trying to fix a bug. I'm trying to fix a bug several weeks later. And I'm going through, I'm swapping things out, changing things around. And let's say I accidentally, delete the return statement. I'm like, oh, crud, dang it. What was this return statement? What was in there? I don't remember. I know it said something. It's got to be using this percentage variable. Maybe it just returned it. Maybe it just returned percentage. Yeah, that sounds right. It just returned percentage as a number. And then now I've lost the context of what this function was actually trying to do, right? It was trying to give me context around what this number means. And now I've screwed this up, and it's no longer giving me back a viable answer that I can do something with. It's giving me back the answer, but I don't know what this means if I'm just executing this function. So again, that's where TypeScript could come in handy, because it can specify, yeah, this was supposed to be a string that was being returned. It was a sentence with information in that sentence. And now all of a sudden I've modified it, so it's essentially just returning a meaningless number. So that's another use case, is when you're working on a team, context can get lost over time, and TypeScript can help us maintain that context over time as to what a function is actually trying to do or give us, what it takes in, what it passes out, what parameters it needs, all that sort of thing. And so, and even in what order. Yeah. Dan Code says, Mine Wolf, when your new JS friends complain about spending an hour debugging a misspelled variable, do you tell them about TS? So that's me. Hi, I'm the one that spends an hour, debugging a misspelled variable. You all have seen me do it on stream. You've watched me. You've helped me do it. I shouldn't say just watch me. You all help me whenever I inevitably misspell something. It happens a lot. So yeah, this is going to be, an advantage of TypeScript in my personal projects. So, we all have seen the real life ramifications of using JavaScript with no guardrails. Third Decade says, where is TypeScript maintaining the sentence? You will see. We'll see that in just a minute, I promise. What we're going to do after our little brief introduction to TypeScript here as a concept is we're going to take this function, all of this, and we're going to convert it to TypeScript. And then you'll see how TypeScript can protect us from making these sort of major destructive changes to our functions. Yeah. All right. So we've executed it with Node. We've seen how it can just get screwed up with no ramifications from JavaScript. Woo! Thank you, Jessica Sarkar. I appreciate the Prime sub. Wow. Thank you. So Jessica used their Prime sub, which is free for them. If you're a Prime Amazon Prime member, you can sub to your favorite streamer for free. Doesn't have to be me. Could be anyone. But if you are an Amazon Prime member, please do use that Prime sub for someone whose content you value. So thank you, Jessica. Appreciate it. All right. So what we're going to do is, in order to use TypeScript, we are going to need to install it. There's a couple different ways that you can do this. So on the TypeScript website, you can go there, typescriptlang.org. You can read about it first if you want to. But there's also a page where you can download TypeScript. Now it says download. We're gonna, just do our usual npm type thing, package manager. There's nothing special that you need to do here. I will put this link in the chat. If you want to follow along, you can. You don't have to, but it can be helpful to code along while we're talking about these sorts of things. So here's the link. And on this page, you'll find, let me just make this bigger here. So on this page, you'll find that there's a couple different ways that you can install TypeScript. The first way is to kind of do it on a per project basis. So, we do, you open up a project, you can do npm install, save dev, install it as a dev dependency. The only thing about that is that every time you want to compile your TypeScript file into JavaScript, you'll need to use npx_tsc. And I'll do a reminder of that when we do our first compile. Or you can install TypeScript globally. So you could use it anywhere. And to do that, you would just do npm install-g TypeScript. And it's really up to you whether you want to install it globally or not. When you compile your files, then you can just use TSC in the file name and it'll compile just fine. So I have TypeScript installed globally on my machine. So when we do compiles, you'll see that I will just use TSC and then the file name and it will compile. However, if you want to do it just locally, you can. Just note, as it said right here in the documentation, whenever you run a command, you'll need to do npx tsc. So either way is fine. I have done both. Now I have it installed globally, so I can just do tsc, whatever. Mavi says, can I use replit? You could look in the docs and see. Does anybody else use replit with TypeScript? Let's see. I don't see a specific note about it here. Okay, Parasocial says you can. Perfect. Yeah. Okay. And also, by the way, TypeScript is owned by Microsoft. So it's going to be very compatible with VS Code and other Microsoft products. Yeah. All right, so I have already done the npm install g TypeScript, but you can go ahead and do that now if you want to, or install it locally. Either way is fine. Just make sure you're doing it if you're installing it locally, make sure you're doing it inside of your folder for this particular project. And then after that, you will be able to access all of the power that TypeScript has to offer. And that's a good point. Dan can code. Yes. So TypeScript is open source. And as judged by the many heated discussions that go on about various TypeScript features inside of GitHub and other places. But yes, it is maintained by Microsoft. That's correct. All right, so I'll give folks a minute to do that. Install it by whichever means they choose. And then what we're going to go ahead and do. Yay, Nasimug, yeah. Hey, Janukaz, that's an excellent question. Welcome to the stream, by the way. I appreciate the question. So, Janukaz, do you have any prior knowledge of JavaScript? Or are you a true beginner? Or are you just a beginner to TypeScript? Well, folks are getting TypeScript up and running. Jenica says, I've learned, but there's been a few years from that now. So I remember, but it's been a few years. No, that's fine. Yeah, so it helps if you have a prior understanding of JavaScript, just to kind of know things about like how functions work and some of the pitfalls that JavaScript has, or how to how to work with objects in JavaScript. And then what TypeScript is doing is essentially then wrapping JavaScript in a type specific sort of wrapper that then assigns all the things we already know about JavaScript with specific types. So it's up to you. You're welcome to keep watching if you feel like, yeah, I know the basics of objects and functions and those types of things. You could always go back and refresh and then come back and watch the VOD later. That's perfectly up to you. Yeah. Yeah, no worries, Jonna. Absolutely. This and if you want to follow along for now and then things get a little too intense for you, um, you can always, like I say, come back and watch the VOD later. If it's a while later, that's okay. It'll be on my YouTube channel. So you can do !YouTube in chat if you want to link to my YouTube channel, and it will be there even if you come back 2 years later and you want to watch it then. It's all good. Sodabound says learning Angular and Angular now, was previously a SharePoint developer using TypeScript. Okay, rad. Awesome. Yeah, TypeScript works yeah, but TypeScript works in a lot of places, such as React apps and all those other things too. I didn't know it worked. That's awesome. It works with SharePoint. It's rad. All right. So I'm assuming most folks have got TypeScript installed. So what we'll go ahead and do is kind of get back to full screen here. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to make I'm going to go ahead and make a TypeScript file. So in order to do that, I'm going to call it ts example dot, and now the extension I'm going to use here is just ts. And when I do that, it changes the little icon from JS to TS. So we have changed from JavaScript to TypeScript. Okay. And what I'm going to do here is just take my JavaScript code and dump it into my TypeScript file. Now, as soon as I did that, holy cannoli, we have got some errors that are popping up. So we'll look at those in a minute, but this is the first thing you'll see when you start using TypeScript is you're going to get used to the little red squigglies, because now that we're using the power of TypeScript, it's going to start actively checking our code as we are writing it. So it's going to be evaluating as we go before we even actually run it. We don't have to wait until to execute the code to see if there's any errors. It's going to be checking it while we are building it. So you're going to have to grow to love the little squigglies. Yeah, the new SharePoint web parts use TypeScript. Oh, wow. Yeah, new SharePoint is actually pretty powerful. SharePoint Online, I assume you're talking about? SharePoint Online is pretty powerful. I like it. I've built some cool stuff with SharePoint Online. Tying it with Power Automate, Microsoft Power Automate, has been really fun. I might be one of the few people that genuinely enjoys using SharePoint, but no, it's fun. All right. So we've got this now. We're seeing some errors here. For now, just type this at the bottom of your file, and that'll get rid of the errors that are for starters. We're not gonna have to do this going forward after this first round here, but just for now, bear with me and drop this in. Okay. So first off, let's take a look at what's happening here. So as we sort of scan down our variables that we've defined here, there's no more red squigglies, but we see some, I don't know, some informational messages. So our first message here reads, variable grade implicitly has an any type, but a better type may be inferred from usage. So what does it mean by any type? So what that means is, talking about TypeScript, we can assign variables to specific types, and many of these types you'll be familiar with. When we talk about type, what we talk about is things like strings, numbers, booleans, arrays, all these terms that we're familiar with. But the thing about TypeScript is it lets us explicitly set those values when variables are declared. So for example, grade right now is an any type, but what I know about grade is that it's actually always going to be a string. So how do I set that? Well, all I need to do is make a colon and then the word string. And now I have explicitly said that variable grade is always going to be a string, and that TypeScript shouldn't let it be anything else other than a string. Okay, got some stuff in chat here. Dan, yeah, we might show that at the end. Yeah, we'll focus on just basic JavaScript for now. But yeah, there are ways to kind of inject some of that checking into plain JavaScript as well. Yeah, parasocial, don't worry, we're gonna get there. We're gonna Yeah, so parasocial mentioned you shouldn't use let separately without setting initial value true. But for now, we're moving in increments here. We're gonna get there, don't worry. All right, so for now, let's just say, all right, I've declared this variable. Now I can set it as a string. And now when I hover over any subsequent instance of string of grade, when I hover over it, it remembers that grade is supposed to be a string. Now I know that grade 2 is going to be a number. That's always going to be a number, never going to be anything different. And the same with test total. All right, so why am I worried about this? Well, I already know that I have a mathematical operation happening down here in my function, and I don't want to accidentally pass in something that's not going to be valid for my operation. So now that I've specified that grade is a string, grade 2 is a number, and test total is a number, and I have a mathematical operation happening here, let's see what happens if I try to pass in grade into my function here. Now it's not yelling at me just yet, but let's do a little bit more here. So grade is a string, number. Oh, thank you for the follows, folks. Now in my function, I know that both of the things in my function should be explicitly numbers, right? Because I'm doing a mathematical operation. So I can not only set my variables as specific types, I can also set my functions as specific types. Oh, but before I do that, now that I've set these explicitly, let's see what happens if I try to make grade 2 into a string as well. Haha, yeah, TypeScript yells at me. And it tells me exactly what's wrong. It says type string is not assignable to type number. So why is this useful? Well, if I ever forget what this variable means, like these variable names kind of suck, right? Grade 2, what the heck is that? So it's very possible that the wrong thing could be accidentally dropped into the wrong variable. Sometimes you don't have the privilege of changing variable names to make them better. Sometimes you got to stick with what you got, especially when you're working with a team. So why don't we set the types to be correct, and then that will prevent us from accidentally putting the wrong value into the wrong variable. So it tells us, it underlines it, it says, hey, this is supposed to be a number. Why did you put a string in here? We see it when we hover over the variable, and we can see it on this little problems tab in our terminal. So again, it's very explicit with what is wrong and where the problem is. So line 6, column 1 tells us where the problem is. So we can keep an eye down here, or we can just watch for the red squigglies inside of our code window here. Everyone I've ever talked to describes TS as yelling. And it kind of is, right? It's telling you all these different places. Why are you doing what you're doing? Stop right now. Yeah. All right. Yeah, and exactly. Mavi brings up a good point. Sometimes the big boss might try to name your variables with a letter because it saved tons of memory in the 1970s. Exactly. You might have somebody on your team that names variables like A, B, C, I don't know, A1, A2, A3, right? You might have somebody on your team who started out on COBOL, and that's, what they do. I don't know. And so there might be various reasons why you can't just change the name of a variable to make it clearer. You have to make sure that when you declare it, you're giving it the right type for starters. All right, so we'll change this back to something valid so it stops yelling at us. So that's it. This is the first check, right? But I want to add additional checks to make sure that for any reason, a string is not going to be passed into either of these values in my function to make sure that this percentage is always going to calculate, at least, it might not be a number that makes sense. I mean, you could pass in, 0 or something like that, but at least it's going to be the right type, and I won't ever get an A or a B or a C passed into my function. So how do I do that? Well, I can also define types. Whoops, if I could spell. I can also define types in my function parameters. So again, these are both supposed to be numbers. Number. There we go. And now that I've done that, look at the squiggly down here. When I call this function and I try to pass in these values, now it says, hey, you're trying to pass a string into this function that is not assignable. This is supposed to be a number. What are you doing, you dingus? So you can't pass a string in here. And I know that I've done stuff like this before. I've tried to do, I forget what my variables are, and I've gotten my variables mixed up in my head, and I try to pass something in as a function argument that is not valid and it's not going to execute correctly. But of course, with vanilla JavaScript, you're not going to notice until you actually run the function, and it comes back with, nonsense. But now here, it's catching it right when we try to pass it in before we ever try to execute it for the first time. Yeah. Tick says, hello, do you dev on iOS native? I do not. I'm sure there's wonderful streamers out there who do, though. Parasocial says, IJK are just for integers. You should use R and Q for real numbers. See, there's those single line. Yep, there's those single character variables, indeed. Beveran says, how do you specify type for the function? Well, that's what we're doing here. We're specifying it right here inside of the function parameters. So this is going to check and see if what we're trying to pass into the function, grade, which is defined as a string, does it match type? No, it does not. And then it obviously tells us exactly where that problem is. So now, as soon as I turn this to grade 2, which is a number, bing, it's fixed. And it's going to tell us, yep, that's going to work just fine. Now, another interesting thing to note here is that I have not set, so the calculation that's happening in here is student grade, which is a number, divided by test total, which is also a number, right? Watch what happens if I hover over percentage, which is the result of that calculation. If I hover over percentage, you can see that it says percentage is a number. So TypeScript is smart enough to figure out, if we don't specify a type and we use a variable, TypeScript is smart enough, in some cases, to figure out what that variable is trying to be. So in this case, since we're doing math on it and we're passing in 2 numbers, we're doing a mathematical operation on 2 numbers, TypeScript is smart enough to know, yeah, okay, this value is going to be a number. The result of this is going to be a number. So percentage is now a number. And that's, it's TypeScript is able to infer what type this variable is going to be. Type inference, yeah. So yeah, and you'll hear that referred to as type inference. Okay, so that takes care of a couple of our problems, right? We when we went through this function in pure JavaScript before, we were able to discern quite a few potential problems with this, right? Said, all right, well, what happens if, this value changes from a string, which is a number, to an actual string? That's going to cause a problem. If we, pass in the wrong variable into our function, we've taken care of most of those problems. But what about the last problem? When I was blundering along and I accidentally deleted the return statement and I forgot what it was. Oh, crud, what was this function supposed to return? Maybe it's 3 a.m. and I'm diagnosing an issue in production. God, I hope not. But I just said, okay, I bet it just returns the percentage. I bet that's what it was doing. That's what it's calculating. So that's probably right? And I save it. Well, notice there's no squawking here, right? TypeScript is not yelling at me because there's nothing wrong with this. This is a perfectly valid thing to return. TypeScript it can't read my mind. It doesn't know what was there before. However, we can, like I mentioned before, we can curb that somewhat, that type of behavior, by also not only telling TypeScript what we want to pass in to a function, but also telling TypeScript the type of value that we want to return. So in this case, in the original function, what were we returning? In the original function, what was the type of value that we were returning? Hey, Nixie, what's your question? Is it related to TypeScript? Yeah, goo goo. We were returning a string, right? Or alternatively, not a number. Yeah. Symbol, did I win? Yeah, but we were returning a string before, right? It was a string and it had our variables in it, but overall it was a string. So we can specify that as well. And all we need to do is just after our little parameter declaration here, we can also add another colon and say string. Now, as soon as I did that, look at that. It's saying, hey, maybe this is not exactly what you wanted to be returning. It says type number is not assignable to type string. So it can't say that, what you've put in here is, isn't exactly the original sentence that was there, but it can at least clue us into the fact that this is not right. Something you have said here is not right, and you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself. I'm going to grab the actual statement here and put it back. And maybe you should take another look at this, or go back into the Git repo and roll back to the correct version, or copy and paste or whatever. And now, as soon as I put it back to a string, everything is fine. We have no more errors. Hooray, we're good. We got it. Okay. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. I have discovered, TypeScript has helped me discover that I was using the wrong variable, right? I was passing in grade, even if, grade was 85 or something like that. I was passing in the wrong variable because grade is a string, which could be anything potentially. And what I really wanted to pass in was the value that was a number, right? And so TypeScript helped me figure that out. It also helped me enforce the type of return statement that I was getting back. So I was able to enforce my inputs. I was able to enforce the output. And that helped me clean up my function and prevent me from screwing up the return statement when I accidentally changed it. Yeah. So let's clean this up just a little bit more. And then we're going to transpile it into JavaScript. Use TypeScript, and we're going to go ahead and use TypeScript's built-in ability to then turn this from TypeScript into JavaScript so that we can use Node to execute it, or whatever you use to execute your code. So we got something in chat here. An engineer I used to work with would write variables with a naming convention that would indicate what type the variable was, like int variable name, bool variable name. Had to do that because PLC generally didn't have variable types. The variable would be placed in specific areas of Mentor that had the integers, booleans, floats. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so really being careful about naming variables and that type of thing. Well, yeah, that's an interesting solution, certainly. Again, that's one of the advantages of TypeScript here, is that we are literally declaring what type it is. But then in the end, we're just going to go ahead and compile it into JavaScript, which will look and act just like regular JavaScript. All right, so let's do a little bit of cleanup. As Parasocial mentioned earlier, generally you don't want to declare these variables first and then set the values. If possible, you want to do it at the same time. So we can do that. Instead of saying let grade :string and then setting the value later on, we can just say let grade :string equals 85, and that will do the exact same thing. So then we can get rid of that. And we can get rid of that. And I'm going to put this to 100. There we go. Nice round number. Okay, so now that looks a little bit more concise and cleaner. So when you're declaring a variable, you can set its type and its initial value at the same time. So that, saves us a little bit of space. and accomplishes exactly the same thing. So grade string 85, grade 2 number 85, test total number 100. And now, obviously, if at any point I were to change these values, it's going to yell at me just the same as it was before. Okay, cool. So again, all well and good, but let's see what happens if I try to execute this with Node. So I have this file. I'm feeling pretty good about it. I just want to run it. I want to see if it's going to work. It's told me it's going to, but I just want to see if it's going to work. So I'm going to say node ts example, caps lock, sorry, examples, example.ts. Okay, ts example.ts. I even got my file name wrong. There we go. And lowercase. All right. Oh, node error. Okay. Node error. So what I have to do is I have to transpile this into JavaScript first. And that phrase really just means transform and compile. So it's going to do a couple things at the same time, compile it and transform it into JavaScript. And it's actually going to generate a separate JavaScript file for you. So how do we do that? Well, there's a command that you can use, and it's just called tsc. That's it. And then type the file name. So our file name again is tsexample.ts. So tsc tsexample.ts. Execute that. It's going to take a hot second. And then after it runs, you'll notice that I now have a fresh, shiny JavaScript file inside of my project. So this is a brand new JavaScript file that was automatically generated by TypeScript. And you can see there's some funky stuff in here. You can see it's, doing all the same stuff, right? Doesn't really look different from the TypeScript that we just wrote, but you'll notice that all of the type declarations are gone. There's no more type declarations because those aren't compatible with JavaScript. It's stripped all of those out, and it's using some different syntax. It's not using the modern, template literals and all that stuff. It's also using older var keywords and that kind of thing. We're not going to worry too much about that right now, but there are configuration settings that you can set in order to get rid of that older syntax. You can have it use newer syntax, let and const, and all those things. But it's okay. It's still going to work as is. It's not going to break. But yeah, so that's how it just automatically generates our JavaScript file for us without us having to do anything else. Drunk Uncle Grandma says, wow, it kept my commenting too. Yeah. It's so all TypeScript is really just a wrapper, it's guardrails, it's a wrapper, it's protection, saran wrap over a salad bowl to stop all the lettuce leaves from flying everywhere when you drop the bowl. It's just protection for JavaScript. Yeah. Dan says, I've yet to get TypeScript to ensure I have coffee ready in the morning. It's the greatest flaw. Sullivan says, I'm updating my LinkedIn. I know TypeScript already. Yeah, that was kind of the goal for today's stream, is to just kind of help you ease into TypeScript, because if you're just coming at it like with no introduction, it's a little bit like, oh my God, it's a whole new language. What do I have to know here? And it's not that bad. You should, hopefully after today, you should start being able to explore it on your own. And Mattel says, so effectively TypeScript converts JavaScript into a strongly typed language is what I'm hearing. Yeah, basically. It has additional protections for spelling errors and that type of thing. But really, yeah, you're turning JavaScript from this very loosey-goosey, anything goes type of language into a much stricter evaluation of when and how you're using variables and parameters and what types those are. You can even declare custom types, which we'll do a little bit later. Strongly tired, yawning JS. Hassler says, so TypeScript doesn't need a comma or semicolon after declaring a variable. Yeah, I mean, technically you should put it there, but it's not gonna hassle you about it. It is still JavaScript after all, right? It's like the hippie that grew up into, a businessman, right? They're still gonna have some of those tendencies of just being cool with everything. So it doesn't get rid of all of JavaScript's looseness. It's the crinkly cellophane around our beloved JavaScript candy. Exactly. Yeah. Can you do this? Congrats on your intermediate TypeScript skills. Yeah. All right. So that's cool, right? We've got our JavaScript file now. It's checking all of our types and everything like that. Let's see, what was I going to talk about next? Did that. I typed a return. Okay. Oh yeah. The other thing I wanted to look at too is it's not only checking for the, when you're passing in types and when you are, what types of things you're passing in, what types you're setting variables. It can also help us evaluate the types of methods that we're trying to use on certain variables. So percentage, as we talked about earlier, percentage has been inferred to be a number. TypeScript is smart enough to know that we're trying to do a mathematical operation on two numbers, and so the result is probably going to be a number. Even though we didn't set it explicitly, it has determined that it's going to be a number. So let's see what happens if I try to set percentage to a method or try to use a method on percentage that does not work with numeric values. So if I do percentage dot, now you can already see when I do percentage dot, it's only giving me a very limited list of methods that I can use. But let's say I'm like, no, I want to make percentage uppercase. That's something I want to do as a sane individual. I'm going to say to uppercase, please. All right, and it is underlined it. It does not like us trying to do that. And it says property to uppercase does not exist on type number. It says this is a number. Why the flip are you trying to make it uppercase? But let's say I am stubborn and I'm like, nope, this is all good and correct. What happens if I compile it? I'm going to compile it again. And it's screaming at me, giving me an error in the terminal saying, you should not have done this. What is your major malfunction? If I go over and look at my JavaScript, though, it left it in, right? It's not going to stop you from doing it. Again, this is just a wrapper. It's not, it's not going to block you from doing that, but it is going to try to shake you by the shoulders and be like, why are you doing this? This is wrong and it's not going to work. What is wrong with you? However, if you decide to go ahead, it's not going to stop you. So I just thought I wanted to mention that. It's holding your hand, it's checking, and it says, hey, this is not a valid method. When I compiled it, it said, yep, absolutely not valid. You have a problem. It's telling you in two places, in the terminal and in the problems here. And it's, highlighting it in red, but still, it does let you do it in the end. So it's going to let you be an idiot if you want to. But it's going to tell you at multiple points along the way. I often write my numbers uppercase. It's a bit of a power move. That's actually, I think that actually works as a bit of a pun, right? Uppercase, power, exponent. Yeah, I like it. Not sure if that was intended, but I'm going to assume it was. Two uppercase, two. Yeah, there you go. Haha. See? All right, so that's just to demonstrate that it's going to give you guardrails, but if you want to jump over those guardrails and into the ocean, you are welcome to do so. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this. Now, it's a little bit annoying, right? Every time we want to compile our TypeScript, we have to, I have to go into the terminal and I have to do the TSC command again, recompile. First I have to save the file, right? I have to save the file, then I have to recompile it. That's a little bit annoying to do every single time. Fortunately, we can get around that because TypeScript has a very similar feature to what you might be familiar with when working with Node. Because again, TypeScript is a dev tool. And so there's a tool in Node called NodeMon, which is also a dev tool, where every time you make a change in a JavaScript file, it's going to essentially reload the file, right? Reload it and display it in your server or wherever. It's going to be watching for changes in JavaScript files and reloading them. There's something similar for TypeScript, which we can initialize so that it's watching for changes in our TypeScript files. And every time we save the file, it's just going to recompile it for us. Doing incremental recompile. So we don't have to manually save it manually recompile every single time we make a change. So let's go ahead and do that because I am notorious for forgetting to save and then, recompiling it and not saving. So this will make it easier on me if nobody else. All right. So what we can do here is in the terminal, we can type tsc dash dash init, and that has essentially initialized our tsconfig file. And if you look at this file, there's a crap ton of stuff in it. If you want to learn more about what's in this file, it's sort of similar to like your package.json file. There's a lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of very verbose comments in this file. If you want to learn more about what these properties are and how you can set them to do different things, I would highly suggest checking out the documentation on the TypeScript website. It's very thorough as to the types of values you can use, what each value does, that sort of thing. We're really not going to mess with this right now. Just know that it's there, and there's values in here that you can change, but there's tons of stuff. There's you can look for where you want TypeScript to drop the compiled JavaScript file. Yeah, all sorts of things. Mavi says I configured it once and I've been copying pasting it ever since. Yeah, sure. If that's if that works for you, if you find a configuration that you're like, yep, this is correct for me, then that's what you might end up doing. Wait, JSON files can have comments? Apparently. This one does. Learn something every day, right? The more you know. Okay, so we're just going to kind of keep this config JSON the way it is right now because we're more focused on the writing of TypeScript right now. But that's something you can explore on the TypeScript website if you want to. Now, what we can do to sort of start that nodemon equivalent is we can just say in the terminal, we can just say tsc-w. And when we do that, it says starting compilation in watch mode. Found 0 errors watching for file changes. And if you're familiar with nodemon, this is going to feel very familiar to you. It's just watching for any changes in our TypeScript file. So if I change this console log to an exclamation point and I save it, as soon as I do, it says starting incremental compilation and found 0 errors watching for file changes. And if I look at my output, I can see that my output now reflects, my JavaScript file now reflects the changes that I made in TypeScript. So this makes it a lot easier for us to make incremental changes and save as we go and always have up-to-date JavaScript output. Yeah. Okay, so this is, our first little taste here. Champo says, this is so cool, right? Yeah, Alex J says, do you mind showing that again? So what did you want to see again? Did you want to see how I started this watcher? What did you miss? I can go back. Okay, how I started the watcher. All right. So in the terminal, what I did was I just typed tsc-w, and I'll type that in chat. Latjoy says, "Wow, this makes TypeScript less of a phantom." Right. A lot of the uncertainty around TypeScript is just not knowing what it is or what it's for or how it works. So that's how you start your watcher. Make sure that you've done so make sure you have your tsconfig.json first. Okay, yeah. So I'll type the command sequence into chat. So first what I did is, obviously, I'm assuming you've installed TypeScript. So, you have a TypeScript file and you're just wanting to not have to manually compile it anymore. So what we can do is in chat, we can just say tsc-init. That will generate your config file first off. And then after that, you can do tsc-w. And that will start the watcher running and watching for changes. Okay. So those are the 2 commands for you there in chat. If you need them, I'm going to hydrate real quick. Now, what we're going to do next is now we have our watcher running. We've seen some of the basics of what TypeScript can do for us. Yeah, and as Dan said, TS has a lot of fancy features. Yeah, it does. So does JavaScript, right? But you can still build stuff in JavaScript using only the basics. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on today to make TypeScript less of a monolith. Yeah, you can ignore advanced stuff for a good while. Okay. So what we're going to do next is we're going to learn more about um, we're going to learn more about various types and how we can set those types, how we can make custom types, and just more about how we can use TypeScript to enforce strict types for various other types of types. I'm saying types a lot. All right. So any questions? I think this is a good spot for us to take a break. What I would suggest is just during the break or stuff like that, just mess around and try to change things and see what happens. See if TypeScript yells at you. Look and see where you can see errors. So if you make a deliberate mistake, watch where errors show up. So you should see errors after you save. You should see errors in the terminal. You should see errors on the problems tab. It's going to tell you where those errors are, and you should see the little squiggly line, underlining whatever it is you've done wrong. So you get used to the places where you can find errors, and kind of start figuring out, okay, what is my favorite place to look and see what things are wrong. The nice thing about the problems tab um, is that if you have multiple problems, um, so let's see, let's make this a string. I'm just going to screw some stuff up here real quick. And I'm going to, let's see what else. I'm going to change this to be the wrong variable again. Yeah, there's that. And I'm going to make a spelling error. There we go. So as I stack up various problems, right, it's going to list them out in a very nice readable format here on the problems tab. So those errors, as soon as I save, those errors will also show up in the terminal, but that's a little harder to read. Instead, I can see them in real time on the problems tab. So just pro tip there. You can look in multiple places and see what's gone wrong. Dumpster says, is it necessary to save it as a dev dependency? No. So the TypeScript docs on the download page, they can tell you the different ways that you can implement TypeScript. Technically it is a dev tool, right? But for ease of use, we've just installed it globally here in this particular case. So yeah, you can do TypeScript save dev and do npx, install it locally and do npx to execute the TypeScript commands. That's up to you. We've done it globally here just for ease of understanding more of the concepts around TypeScript. Yeah, you can, if it's going to be a dev, if you're only using it as a dev dependency in your project, similar to nodemon, yeah, absolutely, you can save it as a dev dependency. But it's, like with most things in JavaScript, you don't have to, but best practice, you probably should if you're building a real project with it. Okay, so I think this is a good spot for a break. We'll take 5 minutes, and I'm gonna, clean this up, and then when we come back, we're going to we're going to explore a little bit how we can also set types outside of just numbers and strings and booleans. We're going to also figure out how we can set types on larger things like arrays and objects, and then how we can also declare our own custom types, which we can then implement in arrays and functions and that kind of thing. So it gets a little bit more interesting as we go, and we start getting into more complex objects such as arrays and objects themselves. We can set those up just like we have with these simple variables. All right. So 5 minutes. Let me get the timer going here. 5-minute timer. And pull that up. All right. I'll just reset that. Okay. I will see you back here in 5 minutes, and we will learn how to use TypeScript for arrays, objects, and declare our own custom types and implement those in our functions as well. So I'll see you back here in 5. Thank you for the follow, Ace Attack. All right, folks, we got about a minute left in the break, so come on back and get a drink of water if you need a drink of water. Get up and stretch if you've been sitting down this whole time. Um, Pet your dog, pet your cat, pet your significant other with their permission, of course. And do some arm stretches or some neck stretches, and then come on back and we're going to learn some more about types. Oh my goodness, Iced Fire, thank you so much for the sub. I appreciate it. Wow, so many subs today. Thank you. Much appreciated, Iced Fire. I'm glad you're enjoying it so far. And Georgie8, thank you for the follow. RFCR, thank you. So many followers today. Goodness gracious. Oh. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the timer. Feeling the love today, guys. It's awesome. Okay, camera back on. Gonna go ahead and clean up my little function here so it stops yelling at me. Set this back to a number. Number. That gets, you can watch what's cool is you can watch the errors disappear as you fix them. So that's very satisfying. So fix that return statement and fix that back to grade 2. There we go. Save it and it compiles and all the errors are gone. So yay me. All right, now let's change tack a little bit and we're going to talk about other types outside. So far, we really only touched on strings and numbers. But the cool thing about TypeScript is that really any other type you can imagine. So any other type of thing you are putting in your code, you can declare in TypeScript. And this includes the common things that we're familiar with, such as booleans, arrays, objects, all sorts of stuff. But we're going to be focusing on the more common stuff first, like such as booleans, arrays, and objects. And then we're going to move on to a few TypeScript specific types, such as enums and tuples. So you might not know what those are, but hopefully by the end of this conversation, you will. But yeah, enums and tuples are other useful types that you can declare in JavaScript, or sorry, in TypeScript, that you may not be don't necessarily you may not be necessarily be familiar with from your JavaScript so far. Yeah, we're going to do some, and also we're going to look at more custom types and putting multiple types together, all these various permutations that you can do. So first off, let's start off simple. We're going to look at arrays. How do I enforce type on arrays in TypeScript? So I'm going to create a new file here. I'm just going to call it, TS arrays. .ts. All right, new file. And in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just declare an array. So how I declare an array in TypeScript, I can just say something like, let's do a numeric array first. So I'm going to have an array called let grades. Now, if I was just doing this in JavaScript, I would say something like, whoops, not that. I would say something like let grades equals that, right? Just an empty array, just initialize it, nothing crazy. However, I want to enforce that this grades array should only contain numerical values. So I could even call it, I could be specific in the naming. I could call it, num grades this, but that's not going to prevent, Larry from hand inputting an A into this, he's not paying attention, hand inputs the letter A into my array and ruins it for all subsequent functions. So I can prevent that now by specifying that it should be a numeric only array. Right now, if I hover over it, we can see that it has automatically set itself as an any type, which so it will allow any type of thing to be put in. However, again, you might start seeing a pattern here. I can specify type by putting a colon and saying number, and then the array symbol after it. So what this says is this is going to be a numeric array. Makes sense, right? Numeric array. Okay. So I've declared it as numeric. Now let's just do like num grades equals, I'm gonna put some stuff in there. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. Everything's fine. I save it. There's no errors in the compiler. Now I'm Larry and I come along and I try to key an A into that array. Wah, wah, wah. It's yelling at me and saying, hey, that's wrong. If I try to save it, it yells at me again and says, hey, that's wrong. And it's yelling at me in the problems tab saying, hey, that's wrong. Okay. So I can enforce, this is a numeric only array. And I can do the same. Let's say, all right, nope, this is supposed to be, well, I'll do a new array for this. So I'm going to go ahead and declare another array, and that's going to be called letter grades. Letter grades. And, if I was just declaring it in JavaScript, empty array, beep boop, that's all good. However, again, it's assigned type any by default, but I want to be specific, and letter grade should only contain letter grades. So what do you think I'm going to put here? If I want this to be only letter grades, how am I going to define this array or declare this array? Come on, Larry. Dang it, Larry. Right? This is why we need TypeScript. Yeah, exactly right, Ryan. We're going to say let letter grades string. Exactly. Makes sense, right? So string, beep boop. Letter grades is now a string. So if I try to say letter grades equals, I'm going to say A, B, C, whoops. And it's also watching for mistakes, right? I didn't close my quotation mark, so it immediately flags that, and it lists it on the problems tab too. It says unterminated string literal, and it tells me where the problem is. So again, it is watching out for me in more ways than just type. It's watching for spelling errors. It's watching for syntax errors. It's really holding my hand here. All right, and then as soon as I fix that, no problems, all good, and I save it, and the errors are gone. Yeah. So enforcing type on arrays is just as easy as that. Latjor says, "Okay, just installed and following along." Awesome, Latjor. Yeah, yeah. I think you'll find you'll start to get the hang of it as you practice these things more and more. You'll start to see the patterns in how we declare types and that sort of thing. Good to see you, by the way, Ryan. Drunk Uncle Grandma says, even though you said Larry, my mind still read that as Bobby in Hank Hill's voice. Dang it, Bobby. Yeah, exactly. Okay, now this is all well and good, right? That's fine. But especially with arrays and these longer, sometimes you get into arrays where you want them to have mixed values. Maybe you're storing a sequence of some kind. That's something we'll talk about a little bit more in depth later. But maybe you just want to pass in a bunch of stuff in an array. You're getting it from an outside source. You already know that you're going to clean it up. And you just basically what you want is you just want to take a bunch of stuff from an API or whatever. You're dumping it into an array, and then you're going to pull that into a function, and you're going to parse it out what you need later. You just want to you're like, I know this array is going to have multiple types of things in it. And so what you can do is you can still control for type. You don't have to make it type any. You don't have to not declare a type. If you already kind of know the different types of things that are going to be in there and you want to enforce that, you still can. You can enforce for multiple types at once. So I'm going to declare a new array here. Master Tinker says, hi all, what are we baking today? Today we are learning about TypeScript and all the wonderful joy and guardrails it can bring to our wonky JavaScript code. So right now we're learning about how to declare arrays in TypeScript. And what we're going to talk about next is something called a union. And that is a union of multiple types. So what it's going to do is it's going to allow our variable or our array or our, basically our thing to accept multiple types at the same time. So in the case of an array, well, let's do a regular variable first. So we're gonna use grade again. So I'm gonna say let grade. Let's see. Let's say student grade. And I already know that student grade could maybe potentially be a number or a letter. And in this case, I want to allow that. Could be just because I'm displaying it. Maybe I have a bunch of tests coming in, and some of those tests are pass fail. Some of them actually have numerical values. And I know I can't, I don't want to exclude certain test grades. So if something's a pass fail, I don't want to exclude it and not allow it in. I just want to allow it in for now, and I'm going to control for it later. So in this case, if I want to allow multiple types of values to come in, I can say let student grade, and I can say string, and then use the pipe symbol and number. So I'm going to set it to an initial value of, we'll set it to an initial value of 65. Okay, so that's a number, right? So no errors there. I save it, no errors. It's allowing that because it says, yep, that is a valid number. Now, let's say I want to pass in the word pass. It also allows that because we have a union and it's allowing both types. Now, what if I try to pass in something like true? Let's say Larry is entering test grades today and he got his fields mixed up, in the spreadsheet he was given or whatever. He's copying and pasting, he's moving super fast. And this was the answer to, was student present or something like that. And he just tries to dump it into this variable. Well, it's going to error out and say type Boolean is not assignable to type string union number. Yeah, this one is not an array. In this case, we're just doing it with a regular variable first to show you what a union looks like. Thank you for the follow. Oh, Tratante. Yeah, so this is how you can do a type union. You can do more than one. So if I wanted to allow Booleans, I could do another pipe and say Boolean and do that. Yeah, I can union multiple types together if I wanted to. And so then if I tried to say change this to an array, with a Boolean inside of it, again, it would squawk at me and say, type Boolean array is not assignable to any of these existing types. Okay, so that's how you can allow multiple types into a variable. Yeah, and the parentheses are not strictly needed here. That's true. But what we're going to do next is we're going to say, okay, we know how to do this union for a regular variable. How do I do that for an array? Because I think that's probably where you're going to be doing that more often, is you're going to have arrays that come in. So I'll just comment this out for now, make it correct, and then I'm going to take Boolean off of here. And I'm going to set it to a valid value. All right, there we go. We'll comment this out. And now I'm going to say, all right, I know how to do unions for a regular variable. How can I do this for an array? Because I think, like I said, I think that's probably where you're going to see that more often, is you're going to have arrays with multiple types of things in them. And you don't want them to just be any type. You don't want to allow anything through, because that could allow for some really funky stuff to get sent to your arrays. But you probably know that an array might have, say, strings and Booleans in it. You're going to have some values that are strings, and then maybe some values that are just true, false, and you're going to dump that into an array. So how do we declare that array? I'm going to say, we'll say we'll just be real creative here and be like, let my array, I'm going to declare that as with a couple of different types. Now, how do we think I might do that? Well, for a number array, I declared it like this. And for a string array, I declared it like this. So why don't I try this? Number, oops. And then I use the pipe and I say string And then I'm going to set it to, actually, no, I said Boolean there, didn't I? All right. So it let me do that. Okay. And now I'm going to say, I want this to have, let's say 1, 2, 3, and then true. Uh-oh. Huh. It didn't like that. It didn't like that. It says, now let's read the error message and see what it didn't like. So it says, okay, type number pipe true is not assignable to type number Boolean. Okay. Number true is not assigned to type number. So it really doesn't like the way I've written this. And I'll explain it in a minute. But the correct way to declare an array with multiple types is like this. So enclose the types, put the brackets outside, and what this allows for is a mixed array with multiple types inside of it. So now I can put numbers and Booleans inside of my array. What I did before when I wrote it like this, is I essentially said, this can be an array of all numbers or an array of all Booleans. So there is a distinct difference there, and you need to be careful when you're doing that union on arrays. So I want to make sure that that makes sense to everybody, the difference between those two types of writing it and why this does not work. Excalibur says, do you use Docker? And if yes, how do you handle its memory leak issue with WSL2? I do not. Maybe somebody else in chat does. Yeah, folks are chiming in there. But yeah, does this make sense? How we properly declare an array of multiple types? Because I feel like this is a very easy mistake to make, and it might not be immediately obvious what's wrong. But an array of multiple types, put the types in parentheses, and then drop the brackets on the outside. And once again, we can have multiple types here. So I could do number, Boolean, string, and that would all work and be just fine. Okay. So I'm not seeing any questions there, but feel free to ask if you come up with questions. And just remember that this union exercise, try it yourself. You can do it on regular variables. You can do it on arrays. We'll probably see some more examples of it later on. But this is what's called a union. All right. There's another even stricter version of this, which is called a tuple, which we will see later on. Not right away, but we'll see that in a little bit. That's a special type. But yeah, that's called a tuple. This is called a union with the pipes, and then later on we'll see an example of a tuple. Is pipe the or operator in this language? Essentially, in this case, it is. We'll see the ampersand or the and operator being used later on. Once we get into type aliases. In this case, yeah, it's basically just saying, hey, this can be a. In this case, it's a little. I don't know. It's more like when they're in the parentheses together like this, it's basically like this could contain numbers and or Booleans and or strings. It doesn't have to be strictly any one of those, but it could contain any one. So I suppose it is sort of like or. Yeah. Yeah, and the double pipe, that's a good distinction. That's a good distinction Dan can code. So the double pipe is still is still like the or in a logical expression. So if I was saying, if I was creating a true or evaluation, a logical expression, I would use the double pipe. But in the case of declaring a union type like this, I just use a single pipe. Yeah. Mattel Geek says it looks like a regex expression. Yeah, maybe so. I'm not super familiar with regex, but if you are, this may look a little bit familiar. Okay. Now, something else we can do is we can also define arrays of objects. So that's something you might do very often when you're doing something like accessing an API, right? When I have when I hit an API, often what I'm going to get back is a big honking array that's filled with a bunch of big honking objects, right? And so if I want to enforce types on those objects that I'm getting back, oops, hang on. If I want to enforce types on those objects, I can inside of my array. Now I'm pulling up some notes here just to make sure I get it right. Let's see. It's this one. Got a lot of files open. One second. Oh, I think I got them backwards. That's what I get for having too many files open. Here's the one I wanted. Okay. Forgive me. TS examples demo. That's the one we're just looking at. Okay. Perfect. All right. And we're back. All right. So let's say I have an array. Maybe I'm pulling from a database or something like that, or hitting an API. And what I'm getting back is a bunch of test data. So that test data might have multiple parts to it. It might have, like let's say the name of the test and the test score. And what I want to get back is an entire array of all of those values. Leibniz says maybe we call the union operator because then it makes sense that operands of pipe are types, which are collections which we can form union. Maybe, yeah, if that makes sense to you, that's perfectly fine. Yeah. All right. So, getting my files mixed up. So there's different ways we can pull back an array of multiple values. But in this case, what we want to do is create an array of objects. So there's various ways we can do that. One of the ways we can do that is actually by, well, let's do this. So let's do let test array. And inside of test array, what I want to pass is an object that contains a few different values. I'm pausing here a little bit because I'm thinking about the order in which I want to talk about things. Actually, I think what I'm going to do is switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about type aliases first, and then we'll come back to this in the context of arrays. So let's pivot a little bit. And we talked about setting up different types of arrays. We're going to talk about type aliases and then come back to arrays. So we're going to go ahead and create a new file. And inside that new file, we're going to switch back to functions and get rid of this for now. And we're going to declare a function that's going to pass in a lot more stuff than we were passing in before. So I'm going to create a new file here called ts, just call it type alias for now, .ts. Okay. And inside of there, I'm going to create a new function that's going to take in some student info. And what student info is going to do is it's going to check and see whether a particular student is enrolled. And it's going to pass that information out just, in a console log, right? It's just going to say student's first name, student last name is checking whether they're enrolled or not, and then what school they are enrolled in. So let's go ahead and create that function. So I'm going to build this function and I'm going to say let student info, let student info. And inside of that function, I want to pass in a bunch of stuff. So I want to pass in, an object essentially, which is going to contain, pass in, let's see, a user ID, and that's going to be a number. I'm going to also pass in a first name. Let's see what I do there. So ID number, first name, and that's going to be a string. Oh, what did I screw up? User ID, number. What did I call the file? Oh, I'm calling it type alias for now. We'll learn what that is in a minute. Yeah. Sorry you can't see it. Oh, I zoomed in a little bit. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more. There, hopefully that's a little bigger. I know it's not super big. That's about as big as I can make it without getting things going off the screen. So setting up, let's see, user ID. Okay, good. Oh, we got a hydrate there. Okay, I want to pass in all of these things as an object. It's not liking that though. What am I doing here? I normally wouldn't do it this way, so I'm struggling about how to pass it in as an object in the parameter. Looks like a struct in C. Maybe so. Yeah, I'm not familiar with C. I would normally do this as a type for starters. Let's see, first, just want to pass in the object. String only refers to a type, but is being used as a value here. All right, let me think about this. Oh, you're right. Yeah, duh. I just have my equal sign in the wrong place. Let student info and then the colon. And, well, wait. I'm getting turned around. Give the object a param name, args user. Okay. Yeah, I was trying to just pass the object directly into the function. Basically, what I'm trying to show here is that sometimes if you're defining type as you go, so here, let's do this. Let's do it this way. All right, that's okay. We'll do it this way. So similar to our first function, what we did, let's see, TS example right in here. In our first function, let's start passing in some stuff. I'm not going to worry about passing in an object directly. We're just going to start passing in a bunch of values. So let calc parent this. I'm going to pass in, let's see, student ID, and that's going to be a number. I'm going to pass in first name. This will still illustrate my point. This is going to be a string. I'm going to pass in last name. This is going to be a string. I'm going to pass in, let's see, what else do I want to pass in? A bunch of other stuff. First name, last name. Oh, middle name. Of course, we need that. Middle name. That's going to be a string. And then finally, I'm going to have is enrolled because we want to check and see whether or not they're enrolled. And that's going to be a Boolean. All right. So we're kind of getting a lot of stuff here. Oh, and then I want to return a string. So all of that just for the function declaration, right? And it's yelling at me there just because I'm trying to return, an empty function. We're going to fill it in though, don't worry. And so, I mean, that's kind of ugly, right? Like that's kind of gross. We'll write the function and then we're going to learn of a different way to pass this information in called a type alias that we can declare ahead of time and then simply call and pass into our parameters. Okay, so let's do that. Let's write our function and then we'll clean this up a little bit and make it look better. So I'm going to say let enrolled equals, we'll make that be, I want to check the enrolled value. So I want to check and see is enrolled. And if that is true, then I'm going to do this. And if they're not enrolled, I'm going to use the word not. And then I'm going to return a string. It's going to stop yelling at me as soon as I return a string properly. So that error went away, right? I'm returning a string now. I'm going to return a template literal that just says first name and space last name is, and then check whether they're enrolled. Put a little space there. is enrolled or not at, and then we'll do that. That's all we'll do for now. Enrolled. Okay. All right. So this just checks to see and says whether or not they are enrolled. Yeah, that looks kind of gross, doesn't it? It makes it really confusing. It makes it really confusing to read, right? This is hard to figure out. If you're just looking at this, this is hard to figure out what this is doing. I don't like this. It's hard to, okay, what parameters do I need to pass in? There's too much here. So what we can do instead is turn all of this information into a type, group it all together into an object called a type, and then give it an alias. So we can name it something. We name that object something. We can create this, we can turn this student information into a blueprint, name it something, give it a custom name, and then pull it into our function as a single parameter. Just call it once, single parameter, and we can use it over and over again if we want to. Yeah. Oh, no worries, Dan can code. You were definitely trying to help. Long parameters so hot right now. Yeah. All right. So let's refactor this a little bit. There's no errors here. This is not wrong. This is fine, but it doesn't look good. So fortunately, there's a solution to that. We can use the keyword of type. Type that I can't spell. All right. Type, and I'm just going to call it. I'll just call it type student. I'm going to use a capital letter here. When we declare a type, we can use capital letters. And I'm going to say type student. And type student is going to have all the same information that are, not that, sorry. Why'd that change? All right, that's fine. Type student is going to have all the same stuff that our parameters do. It's just going to look a lot better. So I'm going to say student ID, first name, last name, middle name, is enrolled. And now that's a type that I can call into my function as a parameter instead. So I'm going to need to change a couple things, but I think it's worth it. So I'm going to say info is now going to be a single parameter that is equivalent to student. Okay, and now I'm passing all these things in. It's going to be, this function is going to be expecting all of these things to be passed into it. So now all I need to do to access the key values in the key value pairs inside of my type is just say info.isEnrolled, info.firstname, and info.lastname. Now, no errors. And is enrolled. Info.isEnrolled. Sorry. Oh no, that was right before. I should have paid attention to the errors, or the lack of errors. So I'm accessing the various values inside of, well, I should say the various items inside of my type here. It checks each of those. I pass it in as a single parameter. Now this function is, whenever I call this function, it's going to be expecting me to pass all of these values into it. So we'll see how I call this function here in just a second. All right, so now let's say I want to call this function and see whether a student is enrolled or not. Now with this custom type, I'm going to say console log. I'm going to call student info. And when I do, we'll see that it immediately gives me an error. It says, all right, expected 1 arguments but got 0. Okay, so I know it's expecting an object. And as soon as I go to a new line there, it says argument of type empty object is not assignable to parameter of type student. So it's checking against this. It doesn't see the values it expects. So let's go ahead and pass in those values. So student ID, I'm going to say like 555, that's a number. And student ID, first name, Mary, last name, Shark. I don't know. And middle name, the, and is enrolled will be, we'll say true. She's enrolled. Okay, and now to notice, as soon as I filled in all of those values, when I finished filling in all of those values, now it says, okay, yeah, that matches what I was expecting. It matches all of the values in the type, the custom type that we declared. And Raz Wonders asks an excellent question. They yes, they ask, can we tell TypeScript some parameters of a function are optional? Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this, make sure it works, and then we're going to explore some of that, right? Because yeah, this is a lot of parameters to have to fill in when we call this function. Like that's kind of rough, right? Like you can tell in this function, I'm not using all this stuff, right? I'm not using student ID. I'm not using middle name. So should I make it so I really have to pass those in every time? Not necessarily. So we'll see how that works in a minute. So I've saved this. There's no errors. Now, Prism asks, just curious, how do you see the vanilla JavaScript this TypeScript gets compiled into? Well, if you'll notice, there's a JavaScript file just above my TypeScript file with the same name, except a .js extension. And if we look in there, hey, looky, there's my JavaScript. Hooray. Yeah, and this is plain old vanilla JavaScript. And so it's passing in, this object as just plain old info. There's no type declaration there. And it's doing pretty much the same calculation. And you'll see now it's using modern syntax because we have our ts config file, which is using a new version of, it's accessing a new version of the like ES 2016 or whatever. So it recognizes our, let and template literals. So yeah, that's what it compiled based on the TypeScript that we created. So now let's just go ahead and run this for funsies. So I can just say node ts type alias, how do I spell that? alias.js. Yeah, there we go. And it says Mary Shark is enrolled, which is what we would expect. They're enrolled, first name, last name. Hooray, it works. Peachy. Leibniz says, well, I never wrote JavaScript before. Hey, MD Res, welcome. We are learning TypeScript today, which I think is pretty fun. So right now we're exploring how to create custom types, which are more than just, strings and Booleans and that sort of thing. Here we've declared a custom type called student with all these values that our function is going to require for it to properly execute. But as a couple people have mentioned, like that's kind of a lot, right? And this function isn't using everything here. So I would think the optional values, like things I don't necessarily, maybe I want to have middle name there sometimes, but in this particular function, I don't want to pass it in, but maybe sometimes I do. So I still want to have it there. Let's say I have another function which does use middle name. So I want it to be an option, but not be required. So it's really easy to make something optional in a type. You can just say, boop, question mark. Question mark. And what that does is it makes it optional. So I don't want to pass, I don't want to pass the, I don't want to pass the middle name into this function since I'm not using it. And so now that I've made it optional, I can. So actually I need to restart my watcher here. So I'm just going to restart that real quick. All right, 0 errors. Now I'm going to remove middle name. If I did this before, I would expect it to yell at me. But now it's not going to yell at me because middle name is now optional. I can do the same thing for student ID as well. If I just try to remove student ID without making it optional first, it's going to get real mad. However, as soon as I make it optional, hooray, it's happy again. MD Res says, why do we need TypeScript since we have JavaScript? So you can always rewind and watch the beginning of the video. We talked about why you might need it. There's lots of scenarios. So, but in short, you don't need it. You can build stuff perfectly fine with just JavaScript. But what TypeScript gives you is protection and strictness around what you're passing into your functions, what you're getting back from other sources, and it gives you some guardrails checking things like spelling. Did you pass the right, are you passing the right variables as parameters into your function? Is it behaving the way you expect? Are you returning the right type of thing out of your function? You say you want to return a string. If you're accidentally returning a number, it's going to flag that. And so I would highly suggest, when you get the chance, rewinding back to the beginning of the stream. And we went through several various use cases as when TypeScript can come in handy and be better than just vanilla JavaScript for correcting, really silly errors, but errors that most of us have encountered as we're working with code. Yeah, typo safety, typo safety and type safety. Yeah, those are the best things, and it's great for collaboration as well. If you're working with a group of 20 devs, you're not going to know everything that everybody else is doing. But if you're all using TypeScript to be very strict about what you're passing in and out of your functions, what you're exporting from one module to another, um, and that'll prevent those clashes where somebody thinks one variable means one thing when it really means something else, and it's going to prevent people from, well, not necessarily prevent, but make them pause before using the wrong variable for the wrong purpose. Yeah, exactly. And that's why you'll see TypeScript as a requirement on jobs with larger teams. So job descriptions, you'll be looking at job descriptions. If it's a larger team, you'll see that they're probably using TypeScript, because it's just protection, right? You don't have to use it. You can still build great things without it. We've been doing that for a long time, but it allows you to be more confident in what you're building. And when you're using other things that other people have built, it allows you to make sure that you're using it in the way that they intended. Yeah. Okay, so we saw how to make something optional, right? We can make middle name optional. We can make student ID optional. And another thing we can do is set default values. So let's say I'm using the student type in this function, right? I'm using the student type in this function, but I know, and I want to add information about the school that a student might be enrolled in. So as I'm writing this function, I'm fully aware that my student type does not currently contain information about the school that they're enrolled in. However, I do know that, sometimes it might, maybe I'm passing in other types of information, or, sometimes I might have a school being passed in as a separate parameter from somewhere else. Say, I'm getting my function arguments from multiple sources, from a couple different databases. I'm combining them into this function. And sometimes I'm going to be getting information about the school. Sometimes I won't. Sometimes that will just be an empty field. So what I can do is also specify a default value. So what we mean by a default value is a value that is populated if no value is passed in instead. So if I don't receive any argument for a parameter, I can just set a default value, which happens anyway. So I'll show you how that works. So I'm passing in my student info here, and then I want to have a second parameter here. We'll call it school, and that's going to be a string. And I know it's going to be blank sometimes, so I can set a default value just by saying West High School, just like that. So if nothing is passed in as an argument when I call this function down here, then it will fill in that field or that value with West High School instead. So let's see how that works. What happens in localhost stays on localhost. All right, so let's see how that works. I'm going to add a little bit to this string here, and I'm going to say enrolled at, and then I'm going to say school. Yeah. All right. So now that I'm using this value, but I'm not going to change the way that I call this function. I'm not going to pass anything else in. I'm like, nope, I don't have anything else to pass in here. So in my JS, we can see that what it's done is it's passed in info just like before, but now it's set school to just be equal to West High School. It said it's going to be equal to that default value. So now if I run this, oops, I don't need to do that. Node, let's see, type alias. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Now if I run this, I can see Mary Shark is enrolled at West High School. It's going to use the default value because I didn't pass anything in to override it. And Latjor says, oh, so the value can be passed in addition to the object type alias? Yeah, it can. Yep. Just like a regular function, if you think about a regular function, we can have as many parameters as we want on a function, right? So this is one parameter. This is another parameter. And I could have more if I wanted. You know, just like any function, I can have as many parameters as I want. This one just happens to be a fairly large object, right? With a custom declaration. And this one just happens to be a string with a default value. Yeah. So we have even more granular control over what we're passing into our function. Dan says, doesn't require the question mark after school. Yeah, no, it doesn't. It'll still take it in just fine. And then if I did pass in something here, and so, get this right. Student info, call the function. I'm going to pass in something here. We'll pass in East High School instead. Save that. I'm going to manually compile it here. Yeah. TSC, TS type alias dot TS. Here we go. All right, and now I'm going to run it. Now, you can see that since I passed in an argument, I passed in a second argument this time, it's not going to use the default because I passed in an argument. Now it says Mary Shark is enrolled at East High School. Okay. So there we go. So that's how you can use types like this, which may not fully meet the needs of the function, but if you're aware of that, you can set default values that will pick up the slack if you are unable to pass in, the value that is going to meet the needs of the function. You can set a default. That might be an empty string or, setting something to true or false or whatever you need it to be, really. It's a little bit of protection to make sure that you're never going to end up with an empty, with a parameter that's not being fulfilled, right? Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. Oh, we're about ready for another break time. We did optionals. We did a default value. Last thing I want to do before the break is I want to show you one more thing. So we have a type here, right? And it's got a certain set amount of values. Let's say, though, that I have another type. So I'm going to go ahead and declare another type here. And I'm going to call it student GPA. Student GPA. And student GPA is going to be pretty small. It's really just going to have, I don't know, we'll just have GPA. And GPA, we'll say GPA value. GPA value. And that's going to be what is that? That should be a number. Yeah, that'll be a number. So it's just going to have one value. Now, let's say these types are fine, and maybe in my code base, these other developers are using these types as written, right? They're using them individually, but I see a need for having a type that has all of the student data inside of it, but also includes the student GPA. So I kind of want like a type that encompasses all of these things. And I want to be able to, pull that type into my function and do stuff with it. So you can also combine types together. And you can do that pretty easily by just using the ampersand. So what we can do is I'm going to make a new type then called student with GPA. And this type is going to be a combination of this one and this one, containing all values from both. Okay, make sure I get this right. Yeah. All right. And I think somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is a fairly recent addition to TypeScript that even allows you to do this. But all I need to do to combine these two types together is just be like student and student, I can spell, student GPA. Now I have a type that contains all of those values. So this is a new type. It contains all the values from student and student GPA, and I can prove that by pulling this type into my function, and we're going to watch it yell at me because I didn't include GPA when I called it. All right, so now that I'm using student with GPA in my function, it says, if I hover over it, it says property GPA value is missing in my function call. So I would need to add, what did I call that? GPA value. Because the type now contains everything from student and everything from student GPA. GPA value 4.0. They're a very good student. Okay, now it doesn't yell at me anymore because I have everything in there. OMG, intersections, too much. What was the question? Oh, I missed a question. Okay. Huh, it doesn't. Strict mode is fully enabled. So, yeah, I don't know exactly. I wasn't aware about the question mark thing as far as when you're declaring a default value. Yeah, it could be because of strict mode. I'm not sure. Intersections, too much power. Yeah, that's all we're really doing here is we're just combining these two custom types into yet another type. And you might say, well, why didn't I just go back to type student and like add GPA as an additional value? Well, that's when you need to be careful because if you're working on a team with a bunch of other people and somebody else is already using this type, you don't want to screw that up by adding an additional value. However, the nice thing is that you can just create your own type. I wanted to say that Bender from Futurama quote, but I'm not going to say it. I'm going to create my own type with everything that I need, and it contains both of these values without modifying the original types directly and overriding them. Okay. Hope that makes sense. I know this is kind of a lot. Somebody's using that type, dude. Yeah. Yeah. And so this is where we would use, the ampersand value to build our own type without having to redeclare every single value over again. Yeah. With stuff and things. Exactly. I'm going to build my own type with stuff and things. Yeah. Okay. So this is a perfect time for a break. This was a lot, I know. But I hope you're starting to get the feel for some of the powerful things that you can do. So just a quick recap. When we wrote our function, instead of passing in, 6 or 7 or 8 individual parameters into our function and making it super long, instead what we did is we declared a custom type of student. I'm going to put this back to just be student. Be a little clearer. Be student, take that out. So what we did, instead of declaring a bunch of individual parameters, is we just went ahead and pre-declared a custom type up here, and then passed it in as a single parameter into our function. And we knew that something about the school was not included in our student type yet. So we just said, all right, we're just going to set that as a default value. So if it doesn't get passed into the function, it's okay. It will still be set and be able to be able to be used in the return value here. So we could go ahead and set default value and then return it. However, if we did pass something in, such as down here, we manually keyed in East High School, that overwrites the default and shows up on the output. Okay. Yeah, Leibniz, I don't think that's going to get you what you're looking for. Combining types, I think, has to use this particular. If you want a singular type which contains all values from both, I think this is what you got to do. Yeah. Okay. Um, let's go ahead and take a break, 5 minutes, and then when we come back, let's see, what are we going to do? Okay, yeah. So what we're going to do when we come back is flip back to our array file and do what we talked about earlier, which is making how do we make an array that has objects in it, right? So oftentimes when you hit an API, an external API, you're going to end up with an array that might have 200 individual objects in it, and each object is going to be a value in that array. So how can we, you know kind of similar to what we've been doing before, how can we declare an array which then contains an object? And so how we're going to do that is using types to make it look good. So that's what we'll do when we come back. It's like we're following some sort of nefarious plan Mind Wolf has concocted. Yeah, it's called a lesson plan. I make those things sometimes. All right, let me get the timer going here. And then after we do that, we're going to flip to some more exotic types, such as enums and tuples. So if you want to know what those are, do stick around, because that's what we will be covering in the last hour of our little course today. We'll be talking about enums and tuples. So they sound like space aliens, but they are types, useful types, that we can utilize in TypeScript to do stuff with. All right, thank you for the follow, Desiree. Reset timer, go. All right. If you haven't gotten up yet during the last break, please do get up during this one if you are able to do so, and stretch, roll your wrists, roll your neck, roll your shoulders, and don't become a hunched over gremlin like I am. All right. See you back here in 5. Ryan says, do you have any fosters? I did up until yesterday. My foster kitten just went back to the shelter yesterday, unfortunately, Ryan. Although I'm sure with spring coming, I will have some more soon. So enjoy the break. I will be sure to let you guys know when I have new fosters. And you all can see them on camera. Sorry, Mavi. Sorry, Ryan. I will let you know. Spring is coming, though. Spring is kitten season. So stay tuned. Okay, folks, we got about a minute left in the break, so please get up and stretch. If you didn't listen to me before, refill your water glass, pet your dog, pet your friends with their permission, and then come on back. I'm going to go grab my tea, which I left over on the other table. And did everybody get up and walk their goldfish? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause the timer here with about 8 seconds left on the clock so it doesn't beep at us. I'll go ahead and minimize that. Get my camera back on. Maybe. Hang on. Oh, come on. There we go. And we're back. Okay. So, as mentioned before, we're going to revisit arrays. I'm going to look at more complex implementations of arrays, such as arrays full of objects, which is something you're probably going to see a lot when you're doing things like hitting APIs. And hey, Hang Anderson, good to see you. So what we're doing today, Hang, is an introduction to TypeScript. I would highly suggest clicking on that link that Ryan put there in chat, which is will take you back to the beginning. If you're not familiar with TypeScript, that'll teach you why we might want to use TypeScript, give you a gentle introduction, and then ramp up to where we are currently. Okay, so Latjor, in your TS config, you should see an option to change the. You can look in the docs. You should see an option to change the ES configuration that it's compiling to. Um, yeah, it should be in there somewhere. I think it's in the target here. I think if you change that and update it, hopefully that'll work for you. All right, so let's go back to our arrays. And what I want to look at is arrays of objects. Okay, so we can sort of utilize what we've learned about types. If I want to make an array that is, so to speak, let's see, so I want to make an array of tests. So that array should contain the name of the test and the total possible score for that test. Like maybe it's, 100, 150, 200. What is the highest possible score for that test? And that would give me something that I could maybe pull into a function later on and, do that percentage calculation like we were talking about earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and make a type and I'm going to call it test. And inside of that, I'm going to have the name, and that's going to be a string, not a strong, a string. And I'm going to have a total score, and that's going to be a number. Okay. Now, let's say I want to make an array that contains nothing but just, as many iterations of tests as I can put in there. So I'm going to make an array and say let all tests, and call it all tests. And I want this array to strictly conform to the values that are in this type. So I want every single item in this array to be an object containing the name and the total score, type string and type number. So how I can do that is pretty simple. I can just say all tests and then call my test type just like I would for, number or string, and say, I want an array that conforms to the type of test. And so I can initialize my empty array here. And there we go. Now I have an array which is going to conform to type of test. Let's see, literal types. Literal types. When you don't want to return any string, you want to return walk your goldfish. Dan says, if it's compiling to older JS, and you're, do you really need to compile to more modern JS? Not necessarily. You can compile to older JS if you want. It's not really going to hurt anything, but you will find that, sometimes things might be a little bit more in the generated JavaScript. It might look a little bit weirder, as modern JavaScript has more concise, reader friendly ways of writing things. So yeah, we've just been using type so far. There is another keyword called interface, which we'll touch on briefly, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on it in this brief introduction. All right, so I have this new array, and it contains objects of type test. Now, if I want to push something to my array, so I'm going to say all test.push, it's expecting an object. So inside of that object, I'm going to need to say name. We'll call it bio 101. And you can see it's yelling at me because it's expecting an additional property of total score. And as soon as I add that property, total score is going to be 100, then it's all well and good. It's going to allow me to push that value into my array. So again, you'll find this type of thing to be useful when you're getting information back from, say, an API. Yeah. So that's how you would utilize a type to declare a type alias to help you declare a custom array that can contain, objects with certain values versus just a string or a number like we talked about previously. Pos 420 says, "Ooh, TypeScript, very cool." I'm glad you agree, Pos. Yeah, and so as we kind of wrap up the topic of types here, I'm glad that www.mwww brought up the concept of interfaces. So um, there's another keyword called interface, which you might see. And do correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe type and interface used to be fairly different. There were things that types could not do that interfaces could do, but types cannot do. However, I believe those two have somewhat converged. So they are very similar in usage, especially at the basic level. And so we're going to be focusing on types, but you'll see another keyword maybe around around the internet called interface. That does something very similar. You declare an interface, and you put various key value pairs into it, and then you can call on that interface later, and you can extend it. You can do other stuff with it, but we're going to focus on types for the purposes of this introduction. And we might swing back to interfaces in a future stream, but I think types here are going to meet our needs for the basic types of things that we're doing today. Yeah, so interfaces, if you look, I would suggest looking at the docs if you want to learn more about interfaces. Um, the TypeScript docs are very good. Check out the TypeScript website and you can read up on interfaces and types there. I would suggest sticking with the official documentation because, sometimes what you find out there on the wider internet is going to be out of date and maybe not entirely accurate to TypeScript in its current state. Yeah. Okay. So that's how you can declare a custom type, push it to an array. And now let's talk about a couple of types that are maybe not something you're familiar with and that you are, well, maybe you've heard of enums before. That's possible, especially if you've been working with mongoose schemas. But I don't know, you probably haven't heard of tuples. Dan says, "Yeah, you can't trust the internet. Use our noble and honest Chat GPT, who would never lie to us." Well, and also be aware if you are using Chat GPT to look things up, it only has information up to the end of 2021. So anything that's happened since then, Chat GPT is not going to know about. You could ask Bing, but it might get angry with you and tell you to leave your spouse or something like that. So I would suggest just being careful, especially with coding topics, what you ask Chat GPT and Bing. I want to be alive. Yeah, the official site here. I'll drop a link to the official site um, in chat here, just so there's no confusion. There you go. That's the official site. You can click on the docs, and there's a handbook. There's a docs. There's even a playground where you can run TypeScript in your browser and just mess with stuff. So it's very nice, very full featured. It is, a Microsoft site after all. So they've got a lot of stuff on there to support it. All right. And also, too, last thing before we leave the topic of types, Um, we can kind of think of types in general as sort of like a blueprint, right? That blueprint can be big or small, and it can, it enforces types, right? Um, you can combine types together. You can call on types whenever you need them. And so, where else have we seen this concept of blueprints before? What's a place where we have used blueprints to enforce structure on unstructured data? When we're building full stack apps, where have we seen that before? Yeah, mongoose schemas, exactly. So if you're struggling with what is a type, how do I use it, you can kind of think about it like a mongoose schema, right? And if you once you've built a schema, you can pull that schema in and do mongoose functions off of it, right? Or sorry, mongoose methods off of it. And it's pretty similar for types, right? So we can pull in types to help us define these arrays. Yeah, it's just a blueprint very similar to a mongoose schema. It just gives structure to unstructured data, and you'll find that kind of popping up over and over and over again. People really really want to give JavaScript structure, because to be honest, JavaScript was not built for the kind of crap we're doing with it right now, like the kind of stuff that we do with it today. It has proliferated long outside of its original use case, and so TypeScript is trying to force structure on it. Mongoose is trying to force structure on it. Yeah, there's all sorts of ways to do it, but that's kind of what's happening here. Exactly, it's just a blueprint. It's not, it's just holding your hand and guiding you along, giving you a sense of, hey, this is what I expect. Please give me what I expect, and everything will work out properly, and the end result will be built the way you expect. Yeah. Leibniz says, is a schema like an index collection, like a dictionary in Python? So I'm not super familiar with Python. Maybe somebody else can confirm or deny that assertion. Strain says, what? I'm not supposed to be able to multiply true and false? Well, the thing about TypeScript, again, is that it's not going to stop you from doing weird stuff. It's just going to yell at you a lot along the way. It's like a backseat driver. It's probably not going to reach up and grab the wheel, but it might be yelling at you if you're speeding down the highway. So there you go. Okay. Yeah, I like that, Pos. Um, JS is a bodged language that ended up being everything on the internet. And that's kind of why it ended up being everything on the internet, because it can do so much. And then these types of blueprints and schemas and that sort of thing are just trying to rein it in a little bit and bring it back and narrow it down to fit a specific niche. Okay, so I think that's about it for types. Let's go ahead and move on to we'll do enums first. I want to make sure we cover that. We'll do enums first, and then we'll cover tuples. Okay, gonna make a new file here, and I'm gonna call it tsenum.ts. And I'm also gonna restart my watcher here. tsc-w, restart my watcher, looking for errors, good stuff. Okay, so what are enums? Does anybody know what enums are? You might have seen enums before if you've worked with mongoose schemas, because enums are a valid type in mongoose schemas as well as TypeScript. So does anybody know what an enum is? If not, that's fine. We will find out. Yes, I use it. Yeah. So enums are short for enumerations. Yep, that's a very long word. It's a very long word, but what it essentially means, basically it's a set of predefined values. And so you can limit yourself to only using those predefined values and not allowing any other values in. So for example, well, the example that we're going to use is months of the year, right? If I have a function that takes in the months of the year, I only want to pass in the months of the year into that function, right? I don't want to pass in like September or Octanuary. Those aren't valid, and they aren't gonna. That my function is not going to execute properly. What I want to pass in are only the valid 12 months. My function should only take in only the valid 12 months, and I want to make it easy to really only choose from those valid months when I'm writing my function and when I'm doing, various calculations inside of my function. And so a way we can do that is enums. You can also think about it when you have let's say like a form, a JavaScript, or sorry, an HTML form. When you declare a drop down box in an HTML form, you can set a specific list of options that someone can choose from. That could be, maybe approved, not approved, and pending. And they can only pick those three options. That's all you can pass in. And so that's kind of what we're going to do here when we set up an enum. You must stop your coworkers from entering invalid months into your function that you took weeks to write at all costs. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Mittel says you define the type and the values allowed for the type. Yeah, that's pretty much what we're going to be doing here. You will no longer have to walk over to their cubicle and beat them senselessly. Now you can use code. Yeah, exactly. All right. So to define an enum is pretty easy. Again, this is just another keyword. We've seen keywords such as type before, right? We've seen keywords such as type. Now we can just have a new keyword here called enum. Enum. And I'm going to call this month. And I don't want to write all these out, so I'm going to copy from my notes, and I'm going to change one thing there. Boop. Forget that. All right, there we go. So now I have a list of months. Feel free to type these out by hand if you want, or just type the first, few. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a function that takes in, essentially, that only allows values from this enum to be passed in. And then also uses the enum to kind of help us construct the logic inside of the function itself. So let's do function. We're going to call it is it. So we're going to make a function that checks whether or not a month is summer. So obviously, an invalid month is not going to result in a valid output. So that's why we really only want to allow the months of the year to be passed in. So my parameter here is called month, and the only valid values are going to be what's in this enum. Okay, is it summer? All right, and inside of here, we're just going to have some logic. I'm going to have a true false value that gets returned. So let is summer is going to be a Boolean. It can only be true or false. Okay, and I'm also going to I also want to grab the month name. So actually, I'm going to skip that for now. We'll come back and add it in a minute. So add month, add month name. All right, we'll add that in a minute. So I'm going to have a switch case, and it's just going to basically say, all right, it's going to go down the month that was passed in, and if the month is June, month. Now you can see when I hit month dot, it's only going to give me the options that are inside of my enum, right? I can't choose anything else. So it's limiting me what options I can choose, which is kind of nice, right? It's not going to allow me to mess up. So case month June, or case month July. Again, it's limiting my options, which is nice. It already knows what things are in the enum, so it's not going to allow me to make a bad choice. Well, it's going to try to prevent me from making bad choices, like a good mom. And og. All right. If it's any of those things, is summer should be true. And since we already declared it as a Boolean, it's going to let me set it to true. And then we end the function, and then we end the switch case and break. Now, any other month, we can use the default value in switch. And for any other value, we will set is summer to false. Is summer will be false. And then we end the case, or we end the switch statement. Yeah. Oh, and I forgot my colon there. Apologies. All right. So pretty standard, switch statement, right? Checking to see if any of these 3 months, it'll set that value to true. Any of the other months, set it to false. Now, we have that value stored, and so we can basically just return And let's do that. Okay, we'll just return is summer for now. So eventually I want to return like a string that contains information about the month that was passed in. But for now, we're just going to return either true or false. All right, so console log, I'm going to call this function is it summer, and I'm going to pass in, say, June. That's my birthday. So month dot, again, it's going to let me select, and we'll pass that in. Save that, no errors. Oops, dang it. Well, it should have compiled. Let's make sure it's compiled. Yep, it compiled. And if you notice in the JavaScript here, there's a lot of funky stuff going on. Don't worry about that too much, but we'll revisit as kind of what this is doing in a little bit. So this is compiling. The switch statement looks pretty much the same, and we're passing in month.june. So I should be able to run this node ts enum.js, and we'll see what we get. All right, so I passed in June, and that was in the true in our switch case, so it returned true. Okay. Yeah, and if you have trouble with switch statements, if you don't like switch statements, that's fine. You can use what the logic of your choice here. The important thing to just note is that as I'm typing, as I'm accessing the values inside of my enum, it's giving me that choice, right? Only the values that are logical to be called against that enum. All right. Here we go. Let me catch up with chat here. I wasn't looking while I was typing. Sorry, there's a lot here I missed. I just didn't want to mess up because I knew if while I'm typing a switch statement, it's easy to mess up. Just do let funny name string valid month. Use single quotes instead of backticks on your template literal on your literal. I'm trying to I've done that a lot. I do that all the time. A good mom does type inference. Yeah, this kind of helps you stop losing time for spelling mistakes. So if you were to be trying to set up this function, and maybe you let's say you passed in June, you try to pass in month.june instead of month.jun. Well, it's going to catch that because that's not a member of the enum, right? So it's going to catch that spelling mistake, which is a very easy mistake to make. You just type out the full month name without thinking of it, even though we've used abbreviations in this function. So what's nice here is it's holding your hand and checking for you to be like, that's not what you want. Switch function works well with enums data. Yeah, it does. I like switch functions personally. I like them. Yeah. So if you console log month.june, will it print a number? Let's see. So I'll just remove the function call here. We'll save it. And I need to manually compile it here. Might as well just hand type it. TSC, TS. And the reason I have to manually compile it is because I stopped my watcher. So if you stop the watcher, don't forget you're going to have to manually compile. There we go. And then run that again. Yeah. So when you do that, that's actually a great segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about. So when I do a console log of just month.june, you'll notice that it logs a number. And you might have kind of clued into that if you were looking at the JavaScript file and say like, oh yeah, it's actually assigning numeric values, right? It's actually assigning numeric values to each of these enum values. So starting at 0, it's assigning 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, blah, 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 right? Automatically assigning these values as if they were in an array. And so that's why, yeah, it's console logging that value of 5 there. Now, if I wanted it to log the name of the month instead, let's do a little, let's add a little bit of a feature to our function here. Instead of just outputting true or false, I want it to give me a string. I want it to give me a string that's going to say the name of the month and then, true, name of the month and then true or false. So in this case, June, I want to say something like June is true and that it is in summer. All right. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to add, as I mentioned before, I'm going to add another variable here. I'm going to say let month name, and that's going to be a string. And that's going to be equal to, it's essentially going to check and see if you passed in a numeric value into the function, which you can do, by the way. I could pass in 5 into this function if I wanted, and it would interpret that the same way as the name. So actually, before we add this new variable, let's do that. So if I pass in into the function itself, though, sorry, let's go back. There we go. All right, so if I just pass in 5, wait, what is June? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5. Okay. If I do this, compile it, and run node on it again, yeah, it can access it just the same way as if you passed in the name. So with that in mind, I can add this month name variable here and say let month name string, and we're gonna say, all right, type of, if the value that's being passed in is a string, so if I'm using the month name, passing that into the function, then just use it. Otherwise, it's like I passed in 5, I want it to look inside of the enum and grab the name of the month at that location. So if I'm passing in a string already, like month.june, that's fine. I'll spit that back out. However, if I'm passing in a number, I want it to look inside of the enum, and then I can use bracket notation to say, all right, get the value at location 5, in which case that would be June. So we end up with the same result. I hope that makes sense. So this is essentially going to force the return of a string which meets the requirements of this variable. So I can save it, we'll compile, and we'll run it again. So I'm going to pass in 5 again. Oh, and sorry, last thing, I need to change my output. So instead of just returning is summer as a variable, I'm going to return a template literal. Just going to copy and paste here. I'm getting kind of low on time, so I'm just going to drop that in. So I'm going to say, all right, return month name, and then the true or false value. All right, hope that makes sense what I'm doing here. Recompile and run. All right, there we go. So it went into it saw that what I passed in was a numeric value. And so when it got here, it said, hey, type of month is not a string, it is a number. So I'm going to go to the false value here. I'm going to look in the enum, look at location 5, and return the month value that I find there, which is June. Okay? Mine says, is it possible for future streams to enable VS Code live share read only? Ooh, I didn't know that was a thing. I'll have to do some research on that. I haven't heard of that, but I mean, if that allows people to see the code as it's being written, that might be cool. Yeah. Yeah, if you're already a JS dev, weirdness should be the norm, right? And again, these are great ways to enforce the rules, but that doesn't mean everybody has to follow them, right? The rules can still be broken, but these are good ways to just put guardrails, a little helping hand around the code that we're writing to make sure that people are using things in the way we intend. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah, that's a great That's a great question. So Raz wonders, so is why isn't TypeScript screaming that you're passing a number instead of a string? So let's examine that. Let's look at the function here. So is it summer? The only requirement for the parameter here is that it is whatever we're passing in needs to be a member of our enum. And so the cool thing about enums is that if we hover over the values here, we can see that it automatically assigns them numeric values behind the scenes as well. And it treats those as valid. So it recognizes both month.april and 3 as being equivalent to each other inside of the enum. So if you hover over, you can see the numeric values. Turns out it's quicksand. Let's go deeper. Yeah, it hides the index. Exactly. But it does assign the index. And so you can access that index at any point. Which is what we're doing here, right? Inside of our little if statement, we're accessing the value at that particular index using bracket notation. So we're passing in the numeric value of 5 into the enum, and it says, oh yeah, 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's June. It's able to find that value and return it for us. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Now, I'm really glad you brought that up because that also segues into the next thing I wanted to mention. With months, if I'm thinking about the months of the year, like if I'm just like in everyday life, if somebody says, hey, you know, writing a date or something like that, you write the numeric value of a particular month. So if I'm thinking about writing a date, I would write May as 05, right? Or I would write November as 11 or December as 12. I'm not going to write friggin' December as 11. Like, no, that's just not how I think about dates. So I don't like that it is assigning these numeric values starting at 0. I mean, I know that's how, like, arrays and indexes work and that kind of thing, but I don't like it. I'm not going to stand for it. And so I'm going to bend reality to my will and do this. All right. So I am manually declaring. I declare that January, that the first value in here should start with 1 instead of 0. Screw the system. I'm right. And so you can manually assign the starting index value. Now, watch what happens if I hover over the other values in my enum. Look at that. Suddenly, they are all reassigned and they are all correct. And we can confirm that if we recompile here. And we look at our JavaScript. Oh, hey, looky thar. The values have all been reassigned. Now they actually match the months of the year. And it's much easier to work with this function if you want to pass in numeric values. Yeah. Amen, Ryan says. Down with convention. Raynette says, will the function fail if you pass the number 13? Huh, let's do it. All right, so is it summer? Let's see what happens. Let's see, save that. Okay, and let's compile. So it didn't give us any compilation errors. And it's also, I lost my node there. That's all right. Node tsenum.js. Oh no! Yeah, so it did allow us to pass in a value that isn't valid, a numeric value that isn't valid. So I mean, there are limits here, right? There are limits to the amount of protection it's going to give you. So it allowed us to pass that in, unfortunately. But as if you are typing in here, it's going to attempt to limit you to the available values. Dan says that's maybe one of those issues with TSE-nums. Yeah, and there are certain issues. I don't want to confuse by getting into too many of those, but TypeScript has its limitations. JavaScript is so whack that TypeScript can only do so much, right? And so there are times when it's not going to catch it. It's not going to catch something. So if I try to do, let's see, month dot, let's do sep. I'll say that like I misspelled sep. So it's going to catch if I access the enum directly. Um, it's going to catch that, right? That's a misspelling there. Or if I say something like September, it's going to catch that too. But in this case, if I try to access it directly via the index, it's not going to care. Yeah. So limitations here and there, but still better than just vanilla JS. JS is so whack. Yeah. Okay. I do want to. So the last thing I want to cover today is tuples. I hope this makes sense though. What we've done here. Save that. We have just enough time, I think, to hit on tuples. And I'll have covered pretty much everything I wanted to talk about today, so that's cool. Tuple, let's see, we'll do ts tuple dot ts. I don't know. I just really like the word tuple. It's fun to say. Um, it's fun to write. It's fun to say. All right. So, what is a tuple? Well, what a tuple is we talked a little bit earlier about um, type unions in array, which is where in arrays, which is where we did something where we could say like I'm going to be able to allow both. So I could say something like let my arrays, my array two, we'll say that, and then I could allow both strings and say booleans in it. And if I say something like yes and true. Let's see, what did I do? Oh, whoops. Yeah, see, it caught my error. I forgot to put the array type there. There we go. Now it's recognizing it properly. So it caught my mistake quickly and it told me what was wrong and helped me correct it. All right. So this is allowable, right? This lets me allow both types in my array. However, what would happen if these values always needed to be in a certain order? So that could be because maybe they're being mapped in a certain way. I have a mixture of strings and numbers and they're being read in a strict sequence, and I can't get them out of order because then I'll have a string trying to be read into a numeric function or vice versa. And so I have a set, and also let's say my array needs to be a certain length every single time. Maybe it's being read into say like here's a good one. Say, think about like latitude and longitude, right? um, I always want my you know my my array needs to always be of a length two items only. Latitude and longitude both should always be type of number, and I should never have more than two values in a latitude and longitude array. Another good one is thinking about color palettes, right? So when we declare a color when we're trying to set a color in like CSS or whatever, if we're using RGB syntax, that's always going to have three values, right? RGB, 1, 2, 3, all three of them need to be numbers. If we're using RGBA, maybe we have four values, but the last one is optional. And so, it always needs to be of length three at least, and then maybe 1/4 value at the end. And so with tuples, we can enforce both type, order, and length in an array and make sure it always turns out the same way. Tronderman says, I tried to learn JavaScript for 5 months but didn't progress at all. So I quit 2 months ago and haven't tried to improve since then. Is this basic or intermediate JavaScript? So what we are doing today is TypeScript, which sits on top of JavaScript. However, Tronderman, I would not give up. Don't give up, please, okay? What you can do is there's a wonderfully supportive community online, which Latjor has just triggered the command for there. It's called 100 Devs, and it's for folks like you that maybe have tried to, are having a hard time learning on your own. And learning on your own is hard. It's not easy. I tried before joining 100 Devs. I tried to learn like, other stuff, and I just couldn't stick. I couldn't do it. I didn't have the motivation or the drive. I didn't know what to learn. And so 100 Devs is a free community. There's no entry fee. There's no barriers to entry. You can join the Discord. You can talk with other people. There's lessons on YouTube that will literally hold your hand and walk you through JavaScript from knowing literally nothing, JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, from knowing literally nothing to being able to build full stack apps, HTML, CSS, Tailwind, database stuff, like literally everything. If you follow those lessons, it's worked for me. It's worked for many folks here on on the stream today. So please give it a try. Check out those links. leonnoel.com/100devs. Again, totally free. Great supportive community on Discord. Please give it a try. Okay. Latjora says it's in the process of working for me. Absolutely. Everybody's at different points. So Tronderman, please give it a try if you're still here. Thank you for the follow, Railer. Or anybody else that's watching and kind of lurking right now. If you're like, oh man, I wish I could do what's on the screen today. Yeah, you got to start somewhere, right? And so Leon Noel /100 devs, if you want to learn more about it, try those, click on those links below, join the Discord, and just see what it's about. Alrighty, it's been one of the best experiences of my life so far. And, I say that without any sense of irony. So please give it a try. Okay. All right. So we can use tuples to set arrays of fixed type, length, and order, which gives us more structure than just setting an array that contain multiple types, right? Because I could say my array 2 and flip those values around and say true and yes, and that would be perfectly valid, right? I can put these values in any order, which is going to be not a good thing. Or I could add more values too, right? I could say false, which is that type of thing is not a good thing when, for example, you're trying to set coordinates or color values. So let's learn how we set up a tuple. No worries, Raylar. We learned JS, and now we're really good at making TypeScript jokes. Yeah, it also gives you access to a whole new world of like jokes and memes as well. You'll finally get to go on the Programmer Humor subreddit and understand what they're talking about. Okay, so let's say I want to set some color values. So I'm defining like RGB and RGBA color values. So I want, let's say, a background color and a header color. So I'm going to declare a couple variables here, and I'm going to set them as tuples. So BG color, and little shortcut here that you can do. If you want two variables to have the same, I guess, type structure, you can declare two of them at the same time. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to say type BG color, header color. And I'm going to have BG color be RGBA, and header color is going to be just plain RGB. So in that case, I want 4 numeric values. They're all going to be numeric. Boop, boop, boop. But my result is going to be fixed at an array length of 4. I can't add additional values. And I want the last value here to be optional. So RGB values don't need this 4th value. So if you're not familiar with setting colors, RGB is just, red, green, blue. And then RGBA is the alpha channel, which is the 4th value here, which deals with opacity, or how clear something is, like how visible it is. And so if I want to make this value optional, all I need to do is use the question mark, which we saw a little bit earlier, right? Optional values you can set with a question mark. And now I can go ahead and fill this in and say BG color. Setting my RGBA value is going to be 0. Oops. We'll just say like 0, 255. I have no idea what color this is, by the way. But there you go. All right, so this one has RGB and alpha channel. And then my header color is going to be just 3 values, 0, 255, and 255. So this one has a little bit of opacity, or what is it called? This one has an opacity value and this one does not, but both of these are valid. Now, if I try to add like, let's see, shouldn't let me, I don't think it should let me add that, right? That's interesting. Let's see if I get a compile time error. To see, I'll do, I'm going to set my watcher up again here. TSC W. Interesting. Why isn't it catching that? Yay! Why does it, I learned, why does it burn? Yeah. Well, let's see what happens if I try to put this. Oh, I didn't save. Well, that's one thing. You hover BG color, what's the type? Ah, interesting. So it didn't accept that. Yeah, okay. I saw somebody do it online and I tried it myself. That means I should never follow the crowd. All right, we'll do it this way. We'll declare them separately. All right. Header color, we'll grab that. There we go. Now it's catching it. Yeah. So that was not a valid way to do that. I wanted to be cool and I did what somebody did online and, yeah. Okay. So now it found an error. It doesn't like that. I wanted it to be true. I know, I did too. That's okay. Tuples are probably the thing I'm least familiar with, just because, haven't used them all that often. They tend to have very specific use cases, I would say. So yeah, now it's triggering the error. Yeah, no likey. Yeah, string is not assignable to type number. So now it's catching that. It doesn't like it. I can put that back, 0.5. There we go. And save. Now the error is fixed. Okay. So, I feel like with tuples, you're going to probably have a very specific use case going into it. And you're going to have a specific configuration that you want for your array. Yeah. Okay, this is perfect. For once, I timed things properly and I'm not going to go over time. So I'm pretty proud of myself right now. This is literally everything I wanted to talk about. Hopefully this was a decent introduction to TypeScript for you. We'll just quickly review what we talked about. So first, we looked at a basic JavaScript example. We looked at a function and we saw all the ways that you could screw up this function and JavaScript would not yell at you at all, right? I could pass in a string and then try to do a numerical operation on that string, and JavaScript's like, yeah, bud, go for it, YOLO. And then you would get back, not a number, right? Because it actually can't divide, I don't know, lizard by 100. Like that's not something it can physically do. So it's going to still spit out a result, but it's going to be not a number. And so then what we did is we took that and converted it to TypeScript and made sure that each of our variables had a specific type assigned to it, that our function was checking for type for the incoming values, right? Values coming into the function, we were checking type, making sure that if I'm passing a number into this parameter as an argument, that those types match. And if at any point they didn't match, I would get an error telling me that that's not valid to pass in. Now, same thing here. I can also specify the value that is returned by a function. So this makes sure that I'm not going to accidentally, blitz this return statement and try to return a number instead, right? Like it's not going to like that. It's going to flag it as an error because I'm returning a number instead of a string. No worries, Dan. You're fine. It's all good. No, I appreciated your input and jokes. It's always good, and it's always fun to talk about something you're passionate about, right? Okay, so we talked about controlling input types. We talked about controlling output types, and this made sure that it was going to inform us at multiple points if we tried to pass in an invalid value into this function. Now, again, this is very valuable when you're working with maybe older code that you didn't write, or you're working on a large team and other people are making use of your functions and trying to pass things into them and get things out of them. You're going to you need stricter controls when you're working with large groups of people, because large groups of people make large groups of mistakes. It's just natural, right? And this might not be like seem super relevant to you if all you've ever done is build your own projects, but I would still highly suggest using TypeScript because it'll help you catch things like spelling errors. So you don't have to freaking, write out an entire server file, so to speak, and then try to run it and get some kind of cryptic error in a node module somewhere that you can't even find because you forgot the S on the end of it, like a schema value, which, personal experience, hello. Yeah, so TypeScript will catch those types of things before you run it and get a cryptic error. Yeah, and the question mark in our tuple there, that just meant it was optional. Yep. One of my key hangers with JS is making this mistake. I assume you mean like the spelling errors. Yeah, no, me too. You've all seen me do it. Again, this is all personal experience here, and also about like people trying to pass in like string values and numeric values mixed together. That's what I see a lot in databases, especially databases where people are doing hand entry. Whenever people are entering anything by hand into any kind of software or program, you are going to get the wildest mistakes. I think my favorite mistake that I've ever seen, and this one actually brought down our it brought down one of our jobs in production. So we had this field. Well, we were pulling in this table that essentially was supposed to take in like the colleges of various faculty members. So you'd have faculty members applying for positions, and there was a field for college. Yay, awesome, perfect, fine. Worked fine 99% of the time. And then somebody tried to paste their entire resume or their CV into that college field. And it just blew things up because the length was all wrong. It had all kinds of special characters in it. So yeah, whenever people are allowed to hand enter anything, you're going to want as many checks as possible to make sure that if they do screw it up, it's caught early and often. Okay, so after that, we figured out how to write a function, checking type in wherever possible. And then we moved on to arrays. So we learned how to define a simple array containing only one type of value, numbers or strings, right? These are two different arrays. This one can only contain numbers. This one can only contain strings. And then we also learned how to use the union type, which allows us to write an array that contains multiple different types of values. So in this case, we can do numbers, booleans, or strings in this array in any order. And then we also learn how to use types. So types are essentially, well, type aliases, I should say. Type aliases are custom types that we can define ourselves. In this case, this type is an object, but we can use it just like we did number or string. Same syntax. Once we've built this custom type, we can call it just like we would number or string or boolean. And now this array is set up to only allow values that meet the criteria for our custom type. So we can define custom types and then call them just like we would the built-in ones. All right, and then after that, so we did a little bit more in-depth look here at why we might want to define custom types occasionally. And so in this case, we built a function that pulled in a bunch of different parameters. It had like 6 parameters or something like that, and that makes your function declaration really long. So what we did is we offloaded that stuff into a custom type, and then just called it here as a single parameter, just like we would a number or a string. So that allows us to offload that nasty looking stuff, make it look really nice and readable, and drop it in here. Thank you for all the follows, folks. I really appreciate it. No, and I'm sorry I missed that hydrate. Let me do that. So in this function, we're pulling in a custom type, which contains all of these values, including an optional value or a couple optional values as indicated by the question mark. This function also takes in a second parameter. This is all that object info is all in one parameter. Then we have a second parameter here, which also has a default value. So if you know that you're not always going to fulfill this parameter, right? I'm using this parameter later on, so it needs to have a value. But I already know that I'm not going to be passing in a value for school 100% of the time. So instead, I can just declare a default value and have it use that instead if nothing gets passed in. So that's what we did here. However, you can also pass in a value and overwrite the default. So when we call this function, we have to fulfill the requirements of our student type. So we passed in first name, last name, and is enrolled. Those were the required values for our type. The rest were optional, so we did not pass them in, and it's not going to yell at us. And then we passed in a manual value for the school, which overwrote the default. And so when we ran this, we got Mary Shark is enrolled at East High School. Okay. Let's see. After that, we looked at enums, which are essentially just preset lists of values. So we can control which values we're able to use inside of our functions by only selecting from that preset list and throwing an error if we try to use something outside of the list. And then finally, what we just looked at was more specialized use case of tuples in which we can enforce an array of a specified type, order, and length. All right, I know that was a very quick review. If you joined us late, I would highly suggest checking out the VOD, which is currently the VOD for this stream right now, which is currently available on my Twitch channel. And just rewind back to the beginning and watch from the beginning, and you'll get a ground up view of why we want to use TypeScript, what it's for, and how we can implement it, and then also how we can convert an existing JavaScript function to a TypeScript function, and then see all of the wonderful harm it can prevent, right? All right. Oh man, I missed so much stuff in chat. Okay. Code spell checker for spell check. Nice. Yeah. There's all sorts of extensions out there in VS Code that are great for, preventing, stupid errors that we make all the time, like spelling errors and that kind of thing. It's nice that TypeScript has it built in, but yeah, there's extensions out there for vanilla JavaScript as well. Hatzler says 100 devs and Mayan made me addicted to coding. Oh, thank you. I enjoy reading and typing code. And the funny part is in school, I love networks and coding. And that was before I met them. So that's why I love doing this, because so many people have a passion for this kind of thing, but they don't know where to start and they don't know how to get into it. I was there at one point. I just happened to luck into a career in SQL because I had to use it for work or else I would get fired. And so that I already had a passion for computers, but I thought I needed a CS degree in order to become a developer, which is absolutely false. Don't let anybody tell you that you need a CS degree to become a developer. That is not true, and it's gatekeeping at its finest. I do not have a CS degree. I am a senior developer, SQL developer, but I also do web development and this kind of thing on the side because it's fun. And everybody should be able to learn this stuff for free without charge. And if that's something that's interesting to you, I would highly suggest joining 100 Devs. Don't pay for a boot camp. It's just going to be a piece of paper at the end, right? So if you want those same skills for free and then help on getting a job afterwards, join 100 Devs. Don't pay anything. And also tune into the wonderful streamers here on Twitch, which are broadcasting this type of stuff for free anyway. Yeah, so I don't know. That's why I like this stuff, because so many people have that spark, but if they don't get any fuel for their fire, right? If they can't afford a boot camp or feel like they need a CS degree like I did, then that spark is never going to grow any larger and it's going to burn out eventually, right? So we got to nourish that. We got to feed that flame and let it grow. So that's why I like this stuff. All right, let me catch up with chat for real this time. Mattel says, I'm a disruptive student. No, you're not. You're engaged. I like it when people are engaged. Cyber Benny says, I attended the Drop Table Users College. Little Bobby tables. Can I just rename random.js file to TS and start pretending like I was type aware all this time? Well, actually, the TypeScript website has a lot of great like guidelines and tutorials on how to convert JavaScript files to TypeScript and how you can do it incrementally. So you can always follow, if you want to convert your projects to TypeScript, you can always follow those guidelines on the TypeScript website, which I keep recommending because it is pretty good as far as documentation goes. Thank you for the follows, folks. Lightning in my bolts and Chelusith. Yeah, right. And if you want to move your projects from JavaScript to TypeScript, like Dan says, um, you just do it bit by bit, slowly. You can rename a JavaScript file to TypeScript and then convert it a little bit at a time, and it's going to be fine, right? Because even if you get the squiggly lines as you're going, like you haven't finished, it's not going to stop it from compiling as JavaScript. You know it already works. You're slowly migrating to TypeScript, and you can compile it even with the squiggly lines. It's going to let you do it, right? So there's no blockers there. You can switch over to TypeScript at any time. There is no try, do or do not. Yeah. Oh, thank you for that extension there for Visual Studio Live Share. Okay, good to know. Thank you. Black George says SQL was my first love. SQL is a great starter language, I think. A lot of people don't learn it right away. I was just a weirdo that like SQL was my first language out of necessity. But I love it. I find it. I think it's really easy to pick up. Super fun. Dan says, "Why did you learn programming?" Well, they would have fired me if I didn't. Yeah, pretty much. Luckily, I had a great manager who was some kind of like SQL wizard, and so I learned so much on the job from him. Uh, just how to do things on the fly. It was a really chaotic environment, but I learned a heck of a lot. Thank you for the follow, Rich Crackers. Oh, thank you, Mitzel. Mavi says, I was going to, then I remembered I have like 10 schemas. It would be a lot of extra work. Yeah, I mean, hey, you can always do a partial conversion, certain files, not some others. Whoa, did we just get two simultaneous raids? What the heck? Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the raid, folks. Good to see you all here. We just finished with a wonderful basic overview of TypeScript. So, if you're interested in learning about TypeScript from the very beginning and you have a basic fundamental knowledge of JavaScript, I would highly suggest the VOD is on my channel right now. You can rewind back to the beginning and learn about what TypeScript is, learn how to implement it in your project, learn how to take an existing JavaScript function and convert it to TypeScript, and then all the various types that you can use in TypeScript, including but not limited to, numbers, strings, booleans, arrays, enums, tuples, union types, and how to build your own custom types in TypeScript. That's everything that we've covered today. My favorite. Basilian says, my favorite type is any. And I'm actually really glad you brought that up. So last thing I want to talk about here. You may find sometimes out in the wild that folks declare their stuff with type of any. And that's kind of a cop out, right? Because they're essentially what they're saying is, yeah, I'm going to declare this with a type, but then I'm going to make TypeScript ignore my declaration. Basically, like, yeah, just ignore this. It could really be anything. I don't care. And so what I've what I've kind of read on the internet and stuff like that and seen around is sometimes people use TypeScript because it's the current hotness, but then they'll just declare everything as any, and so it doesn't matter anyway. It's basically just the spell checker at that point, right? And so if you can, whenever possible, try to be strict with your type declarations. You can use unions if you know something's going to have more than one type. Um, and yeah, so just be careful about that. There is a type any, but I think even the official documentation says that you shouldn't use it. It exists. It's like with so many things in JavaScript. It exists, but you probably shouldn't use it. Hey, Chrissy Codes, what were you working on today, Chrissy? Chico says, damn, I was going to ask what TypeScript was. Well, Chico, to give you a quick overview of what TypeScript is, to tell you whether, to give you an idea of whether you want to rewind this VOD and watch from the beginning. So what TypeScript is essentially a wrapper for JavaScript. Because if you're familiar with JavaScript at all, you know that JavaScript is kind of like, your hippie uncle that's, just like, yeah, man, whatever you want to do is cool with me. I don't care. Boundaries are for losers. You can, Sure, yeah, you can pass a string into a numeric function. I don't care. Like, man, yeah, can I divide apple by 100? No, but let's do it anyway. And so that's kind of how JavaScript is. It's very loosey goosey. You can do whatever you want. And then any errors that happen when the code runs, that's on you, baby. But what TypeScript does is it allows you to actually specify types for your variables, specify types for your function parameters, specify the type of what you want your function to return. So if you're working with a group of 20 devs, nobody's going to try, well, they're going to get a warning if they try to pass, let's say, a string value into your numeric function, your function that's doing a mathematical calculation, right? So it's going to warn you if you try to divide apple by 100. And so it also does things like checking for spelling errors. Checking for type mismatches in other places. You can define custom types. It's a really wonderful set of guardrails, but it doesn't limit you in any way. You can still compile code that has errors and compile it into JavaScript, and it will let you. It's more of just a second pair of eyes that's watching your code and making sure you're not doing anything stupid. Which I think we all need at various points in our dev journey, especially when we're working with a large team. So if you're interested in learning more about that, rewind the VOD back to the beginning and we'll step through it together. And you can see exactly how to use TypeScript to build stricter, better code and then compile it to JavaScript. Oh my goodness, Drunk Uncle Grandma has redeemed a foster kitten. So one of my channel point rewards is to name a foster kitten. Um, So I currently don't have any foster kittens. I just returned my last foster kitten yesterday. However, I will have more soon, and so Drunk Uncle Grandma has redeemed that reward for 25,000 channel points. And so yes, the first kitten that slaps people for no reason is Rick James, I suppose. Okay, so we'll figure that out when I get my next foster kitten. We'll make that determination. Mittel says, "Oh, Chrissy Codes, you sing? That's awesome." Uh, No, I saw your redemption, Drunk Uncle Grandma. I don't know why. Maybe it didn't show up. No, I see it. It's on my redemption list, so I saw it. Yeah, and Dankin Code says, TypeScript will let you spell your janky variable names and strings however you want, but they have to be defined. Exactly. So if I define a variable, of, I don't know, principal, right? And I define principal PAL, and then I try to reference it later as PLE. That's not how I defined it, so it's going to flag it, even though both spellings are technically correct. Mustache cat. So yes, and Mavi's angling for a mustache cat. Yeah. All right. So, Drunk Uncle Grandma, I have your redemption, so I will let you know as soon as I have another foster kitten, and we can get you sorted out there. All right. Any last questions before we wrap up today? Thank you so much for the 2 folks that rated today, and feel free to subscribe, or well, no, sorry, feel free to give me a follow and check out my other content on my Twitch channel. I teach basic web development coding, so if that's something you want to get into, check out some of my other VODs. I also have a YouTube channel which is ad free, so no ads. It's not monetized. You can watch videos ad free on my YouTube channel. If you do !YouTube in chat, you can get a link to that as well. So if you want to learn how to do web development, maybe hitch a ride with me here and check out some of my past content. What is Floppy says next stream also TypeScript or yeah, maybe so. We might do another TypeScript stream. I think what I'd like to talk about maybe next time is, we've learned how to compile a TypeScript file, right? But how would we actually, build a project that we could actually launch, right? Compile it, have a source file and a destination file, and then, launch that project in, you know, build a real app with this, right? To prove that, yeah, the code that it's generating is valid and you can use it in your apps. So that's what we might do. We might build a full stack app with TypeScript next time. Thank you for the follow, Dev Tarek, and PSI Lux, and thank you for the follow, Chrissy. Yeah, so I'm thinking maybe TypeScript next time as well, building on some of these skills that we picked up last time, and just building a simple app, um, but incorporating, some of the things that we've learned, declaring types and that sort of thing. What does Poppy say? Is this class going to be on your YouTube channel? Yes, not immediately. Usually, I move them after a couple weeks, so they stay up. They stay up on Twitch right here for a couple weeks, and then I move them to my YouTube channel after a bit, but before they expire. I do not let them expire here on Twitch. They will get moved before then. I usually move them in batches because it takes many hours for them to actually transfer over to YouTube. With as long as my streams are, yeah, it takes like a day for them to move over, so it's a big deal. Thank you for the follow, OP Bullets. All right, any last questions before we wrap up? Thank you all for joining me today. I think we had a good time. Um, I certainly did. I hope you did. These streams are a great way for me to learn as well as you. So I hope this was good. Basilius, thank you for the follow. Also, thank you for all the subs during the stream today. That was much appreciated. Um, bye, Mitzel. All right. Hey, no, streaming on a Sunday. This is I look forward to this every weekend. This makes me spend my Saturday preparing a lesson plan, which is good practice. And then, on Sunday I do my stream. So it all works. All right, let's find somebody to raid, shall we? We've got a good crop of people here. So let's spread the love and let's raid somebody else. Let's find a good person in the software and game dev category. Feel free to make a suggestion if you would like to. Otherwise, I'll just look at my, list of folks that I follow and raid somebody there. But let's see what we've got. Do, 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 do. Oh, come on. I always click the wrong button. All right, who do we got today? So we've got CM Griffing. They're a common raid target for us. They're always fun. We've got Team Vash, and we've got Time Enjoyed. If anybody else has a suggestion, feel free to spout it out. Otherwise, I think it'll be either CM Griffing or Team Vash today. Looks like Time Enjoyed might be doing some art. That might be fun too. All right, I'm not seeing any suggestions in chat. May the red squiggles be ever in your favor. Thank you, Dan. So yeah, let's see what Time Enjoyed is doing art. Yeah, they sometimes code, they sometimes do art, they sometimes do tarot. They're pretty fun. So let's go ahead and raid them. I'm starting the raid now. And yeah, I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend and go try out TypeScript. Go have some fun with it. And I will see you back here next weekend, probably for more TypeScript. Alrighty, have a good one. Raid is starting now. And go. All right, rating now.